They called it Glass Lake because it never gave anything back. Not bodies, not evidence, not truth. For 36 years, since the first disappearance in 1984, it kept its secrets under a sheet of perfect, unbroken ice until the thaw. In the spring of 2020, the warmest winter on record cracked the ice, and the past floated up. What the divers found beneath the surface would reopen Case 46B, a file sealed for nearly 4 decades, and unravel the town that buried it. If you want more stories like this one, subscribe and turn on notifications, because tonight we're diving beneath the ice of Glass Lake. The ice broke on a Thursday. Deputy Clara Nguyen had been patrolling the North Shore since dawn, her cruiser tires crunching over frost-bitten gravel, the air sharp enough to make her eyes water. She almost didn't see it. The hole in the ice, oval, ragged, steaming faintly in the early light. She stepped out, boots sinking into slush, radio hissing against her shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I've got an opening near mile marker 12, size of a canoe, maybe larger. Looks recent static then. Copy Unit 4. Any sign of wildlife? Hunters?" Clara stared at the slick water. Something pale drifted just beneath the surface, like fabric. She squinted, leaned forward. Not fabric. A hand. By the time the dive team arrived, the sun had lifted above the pines, spilling silver light across the lake. They broke through more ice, their poles knocking hollowly as they widened the hole. The crowd that gathered was small. Locals who'd heard the sirens, fishermen from the nearby cabins, an old man wrapped in a blanket who kept repeating, "It's the children." It's the Glass Lake children. Detective Reyes arrived an hour later. He hadn't planned to come back to Harlow County. Not after the Holbrook case. Not after Austin's press hounds had turned his name into a cautionary tale. But cold cases had a way of thawing just when you wanted them to stay buried. He stepped from his unmarked car, wind cutting through his coat. "What have we got?" Clara met him by the tape. Her cheeks were red from the cold. "Body, sir. Maybe 2. The ice kept them sealed. Water's low this year." Reyes looked out at the hole. Divers were surfacing, shouting for a stretcher. Behind them, the rest of the lake shimmered, vast, still, treacherous. "How old?" he asked. "Hard to tell." "They're small." Reyes's stomach turned. He'd read the file once, years ago, when he was still green. Case 46B. Glass Lake Disappearances, 1984 to 1986. 12 children missing, ages 6 to 12. No bodies recovered. He walked to the shoreline where the paramedics were setting up a tent. The first body lay on a tarp, wrapped in translucent sheeting. A child's skeleton, mostly intact, strands of hair still clinging to the skull. A faded denim jacket with a stitched patch on the sleeve. Glass Lake Camp. Reyes exhaled slowly. "Get me the old case file," he said. "Everything." Clara hesitated. "Sir, the archives burned down in 98. "Then start digging," he replied. "Somebody out here remembers." That night, Reyes checked into the county motel. The heater groaned like an old dog. He sat at the desk, flipping through photocopies he'd begged from the state database. Grainy missing person flyers, faded newspaper clippings, photographs of the lake in summer, families on paddle boats, kids with ice cream smiles. All gone by August 1986. The official narrative was brief. Camp Glass Lake closed after a storm and financial scandal. Children presumed drowned. No remains recovered. But the local whispers told a different story. About a counselor who vanished. About sealed tunnels beneath the camp's dining hall. About noises under the ice in winter. Reyes rubbed his eyes. He was too old for ghost stories. Too tired for miracles. But he couldn't shake the image of that denim sleeve rising through the water like a waving hand. Outside, wind rattled the motel sign. The A in vacancy flickered until it burned out completely. 2 days later, the coroner called. "They're not all from the same time," Dr. Sanchez said. "Different stages of decomposition. Some could have been under there for decades. Others maybe 10, 15 years." Reyes frowned. "So someone kept using the lake." "Looks that way." He drove back to the site. The melt had widened, revealing a grotesque tableau. Bits of clothing snagged on reeds, fragments of toys half buried in mud. One tiny shoe caught in a snarl of fishing line. Reporters had already arrived, their vans lining the access road. The sheriff, red-faced and sweating despite the cold, tried to corral them. "No comment till we confirm IDs," he barked. Reyes knelt near the shoreline. Beneath the shallow water, something gleamed, plastic, faded yellow. He reached in and lifted it out. A lunchbox, the kind kids carried in the 80s, embossed with cartoon astronauts. Inside, sealed tight, were 3 Polaroids. He slipped on gloves, eased one free. The first photo showed a group of children lined up by a dock, smiling, squinting at the sun. The second showed the same group later that evening, sitting around a fire. The third was darker, blurred, flash overexposed. But one detail was unmistakable. A figure standing behind the children, face turned toward the camera, eyes reflecting white like an animal's. Back at his motel, Reyes pinned the photos to the wall with thumbtacks. Under them, he wrote in black marker, "Case 46B, reopened." The following morning, rain replaced the cold. Glass Lake steamed in the gray light, the surface rippling as if exhaling after a long sleep. The divers would return at dawn. Reyes sat in his car, coffee cooling in his hands, watching the water swallow the rain. In 36 years, no one had told the truth about what happened to those children. Now the lake was speaking, and he intended to listen. Detective Reyes returned to Glass Lake before sunrise. Mist lay low across the water, a silver sheet veiling the shore. The temporary crime scene tents loomed like pale ghosts against the trees. The air tasted of iron and thawing mud. He parked by the access road where the deputies had strung yellow tape through the pines. A line of tire ruts already scarred the frozen soil. Reporters, gawkers, and one old local who swore the lake was cursed since the drought of '84. Reyes ducked beneath the tape and headed for the main tent. Inside, the heaters hissed. The smell of wet nylon, coffee, and preservative chemicals mixed into something sour. Dr. Sanchez stood over a steel table laid with evidence trays. Bone fragments, scraps of denim, a child-sized sneaker whose rubber had hardened like stone. "They pulled 2 more overnight," she said, "both within 20 feet of yesterday's recovery site." Reyes removed his gloves. "Same condition?" Sanchez nodded. "Submerged, partially mineralized. The ice sealed them like time capsules. We'll need carbon dating to narrow the timeline, but my guess, early to mid-80s. Possibly earlier." Reyes studied the bones. Small, delicate. "That makes 5 total." "5 confirmed," she said. "And a 6th we're still extracting." He straightened. "You think they were dumped together?" Sanchez hesitated. "Not dumped. Placed. The spacing's too even." A chill ran through him that had nothing to do with the weather. "Like graves." "Exactly." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the tent flaps. Reyes walked down to the shoreline where Deputy Nguyen stood with a clipboard. She glanced at him, eyes rimmed with fatigue. "Locals are saying the lake's haunted again." "It always was," he said. She smiled faintly. "Media's running with it. You might want to brace for that." He followed her gaze. Across the water, television crews were setting up tripods. The nearest news van bore the logo, KATX-7 Austin, breaking now. Glass Lake bodies recovered. Reyes sighed. "We'll issue a statement at noon. Till then, keep everyone behind the tape." By mid-morning, the temperature climbed, and the frozen ground began to soften. The divers prepared another sweep while technicians erected a second tent for sorting debris. Reyes moved among them quietly, noting each artifact as it emerged. A rusted whistle, a length of chain, what looked like the remains of a camp badge. Every object seemed to hum with absence. He paused near the equipment truck where Clara Nguyen was logging recovered items. "Any sign of that lunchbox I found?" "Bagged and tagged," she said. "The Polaroids are in evidence. We'll courier them to forensics today." "Good. Make sure the chain of custody stays clean. I don't want this case contaminated by rumor." Clara hesitated. "There's already plenty of rumor, sir." He waited. "People say Camp Glass Lake never really closed," she continued. "That after the disappearances, the owner started running it privately, for select families." Off the books, Reyes rubbed his temples. "And who told you that?" "My aunt worked in county records back then, said inspection documents went missing. The property changed hands twice under different shell companies." He considered this. "Get me whatever files she still has." Quietly. At noon, he faced the reporters. They clustered near the county pier, microphones jutting like weapons. Reyes kept his voice level. "We can confirm the recovery of multiple human remains from Glass Lake. Identification is pending. The investigation is active and ongoing. We ask the public to avoid speculation until forensic results are complete." "Detective, are these the children from 1984? A journalist shouted. "We don't know yet." "Is it true you worked the Halbrook case in Austin?" A flashbulb popped. Reyes flinched inwardly. "Next question. Are you reopening the entire 46B file?" He paused. "Yes," he said finally. "Every page." That night the news looped his soundbite on repeat. The phrase, "every page," became a headline, and with it came the ghosts. Reyes's motel room had transformed into a war zone of paper. He pinned newspaper clippings across the wall. 12 children missing from summer camp. Parents demand answers. Search called off after 4th week. Below each headline he tacked photographs. Faces smiling from another era. Hair feathered, eyes bright with the unguarded joy of the early 80s. He stared at them until they blurred. The file listed 12 names. Only 5 bodies so far. That meant 7 still under the ice. Or somewhere worse. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. "Detective Reyes." A woman's voice, soft but strained. "My name's Marianne Coker. I saw the news. My brother disappeared at that camp. Eddie Coker. He was 9." Reyes sat up. "I remember the name. They said he drowned," she continued. "But Eddie was afraid of water. He wouldn't even wade in past his knees." "Can I talk to you?" "Please." He glanced at the clock. 9:47 p.m. "Where are you calling from, Ms. Coker?" "Gainesville. About 3 hours north. I'll come to you tomorrow." "No," she said quickly. "I'll drive down. I need to see the lake." Her tone carried a quiet desperation that told him she wouldn't be dissuaded. "All right," he said. "Meet me at the county office at 10. Morning came gray and damp. Reyes brewed motel coffee that tasted like melted pennies, then stepped outside to watch fog drift over the parking lot. Across the road, the diner's neon sign blinked open 24 hours, though it looked like it hadn't closed in decades. He crossed over, slid into a booth, and ordered eggs. The waitress recognized him from television. "You really think they'll find the rest of them?" Reyes didn't look up. "We'll find something." She poured his coffee. "My cousin was supposed to work kitchen duty at that camp the summer before it shut down. Quit last minute. Said the place gave her nightmares. She still won't talk about it." "What nightmares?" The waitress shrugged. "Something about voices under the floor. I told her it was just raccoons." When he returned to the lake later that morning, Marianne Coker was waiting by the fence. A small woman in her 50s with wind-reddened cheeks and a faded denim jacket, not unlike the one they'd recovered. "I used to come here every year," she said. "My dad helped build the cabins." Reyes opened the gate. "You understand it's still an active crime scene?" "I won't touch anything." She stepped closer to the water, staring at the hole where divers had gone in. "Eddie loved the stars," she whispered. "Said he wanted to be an astronaut?" Mama used to tell him the lake was a mirror for heaven. Reyes watched her carefully. Do you remember anyone unusual that summer? She nodded. There was a counselor, Mr. Devereaux. Tall, quiet. Always wore sunglasses, even indoors. Said he'd worked at camps all over the state, but nobody ever met his family. After Eddie went missing, he disappeared too. Reyes wrote the name down. Devereaux. First name? I don't know. The camp records might, but I never saw him again. He folded his notebook. Thank you, Miss Coker. We'll check it. As she turned to leave, she hesitated. Detective? Yes? When the ice broke, do you think they wanted to be found? He didn't answer, because some part of him feared the answer was yes. That evening, Reyes met Clara at the evidence tent. She had a folder tucked under her arm. Found something you'll want to see, she said. Inside were Xeroxed property deeds dating back to 1983. The original camp owner, Glass Lake Youth Foundation, had sold the land to a private trust 6 months before the first disappearance. The trustee's name, Charles Devereaux. Reyes's pulse quickened. That's our counselor. There's more, Clara said, flipping a page. In 1990, the land transferred again, to a shell corporation based in Louisiana. Guess who signed the paperwork? Devereaux. Exactly. Reyes stared at the document. The signature was shaky, almost childlike. Get me the corporate registration, he said, and check any death certificates. Already did. No record of his death. He nodded slowly. Then maybe he never left. That night, rain hammered the motel roof. Reyes dreamed of water, dark, heavy, filled with drifting shapes. When he woke, his phone was ringing again. Detective Reyes, he muttered. Sir, it's Clara. You'd better come down to the coroner's lab. He dressed in record time. When he arrived, Sanchez met him at the door. We finished preliminary dental matches, she said. We've got IDs on 2 of the kids, Eddie Coker and a girl named Lily Martins, both from the original list Reyes exhaled. So it is them. Yes, but that's not the strange part. She handed him a photo of Lily's recovered remains. A silver pendant hung around the neck bone, a small charm shaped like a key. We thought it was jewelry, Sanchez said. But it's not. It's a locker key. Number 12. From the camp, most likely. Reyes turned it over in his gloved hand. Stamped faintly on the back were 3 letters, CDE, Charles Devereaux Enterprises. He looked at Sanchez. The killer signed his work. Outside, dawn was breaking again. The lake shimmered faintly through mist, glassy and indifferent. Reyes stood at the edge, the pendant cold in his palm. Behind him, the camp's derelict dining hall crouched among the trees, windows boarded, roof sagging. A sign still hung above the door, half-rotted but legible. Welcome to Glass Lake. Camp, where summer never ends. Reyes pocketed the key. Summer had ended all right. It just hadn't let go. He turned back toward the tents, the first siren of morning echoing across the water. The investigation had only begun. The rain finally stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the air heavy and raw. Detective Reyes parked by the pier and sat for a while, listening to the tick of the engine as it cooled. The surface of Glass Lake was no longer a mirror. Ripples spread slowly from the center where the divers' buoys bobbed like patient sentinels. He sipped cold coffee, scanning the mist. Every sound seemed amplified. The groan of the docks, the creak of a rope, the faint squawk of a crow overhead. Behind him, the sheriff's cruiser pulled up, tires hissing through puddles. Sheriff Harlan stepped out, tugging at the collar of his damp uniform. You ever sleep, Reyes? Not lately. Harlan looked out at the lake. County's in a panic. Phones won't stop ringing. Reporters think we've got a serial killer from the 80s back from the grave. Maybe he never left, Reyes said. The sheriff studied him. You believe that? Reyes didn't answer. He'd seen too many monsters who lived ordinary lives, fathers who tucked children in at night, teachers who smiled for yearbooks. The only thing that ever died was their secrecy. The divers were already waist-deep, carrying a new sonar rig that looked like a floating satellite dish. Clara Nguyen crouched beside the monitor on shore, watching grainy shapes move across the screen. "What am I looking at?" Reyes asked. "Anomalies," she said. "Dense spots under the sediment, about 30 feet out." "How dense?" She frowned. "Denser than bone. Could be metal." The sonar trace flared again, a curved shadow, almost symmetrical. "Boat hull?" he suggested. Clara shook her head. "Too small. Could be. A container." He felt a muscle tighten behind his jaw. "Mark the coordinates." By mid-morning, the water had gone slate gray, the sky pressing down like wet wool. Reyes walked the perimeter with Harlan, noting each tent, each grid marker. The crime scene team moved like surgeons, careful, deliberate. Yet beneath their professionalism hung a quiet dread. "Find anything in the archives?" Harlan asked. "Not much. County records burned. But I've got property deeds tying the camp to a man named Charles Devereaux." Harlan's brow creased. "Devereaux? Sounds familiar. He ran the camp when the kids disappeared. Never charged. Vanished soon after the sheriff scratched his chin. There was talk back then. State grants, private investors. Whole thing smelled political. When the kids went missing, everyone wanted it buried fast. Why? Because one of the investors was a senator's brother." Reyes stopped walking. "Name?" Harlan looked uneasy. "You really want to open that door?" "I just did." Inside the evidence tent, Dr. Sanchez had laid out the latest recovery, a small, rust-eaten lockbox, pried open by corrosion. Inside lay a cluster of personal effects, hair clips, a friendship bracelet, a laminated ID card warped by water. The card read, "Counselor, Charles Devereaux." Sanchez handed Reyes a pair of gloves. "We found it near the anomaly site. Could have drifted. Could have been weighted down." Reyes studied the photo on the ID. The man was smiling faintly, as if caught mid-thought. Dark hair, sunglasses hanging from his shirt collar, a mole near his temple. "Do a full print analysis," he said. "Compare to anything on file." Sanchez hesitated. "There's something else." She held up a plastic vial containing a fragment of film, water-damaged but visible under light. "Old Super 8 reel," she said. "Label's gone." Reyes's pulse quickened. "Can it be restored?" "We'll try." He imagined the flicker of that film, the soundless ghosts of children running through sunlight, unaware that time itself was about to close over them. At noon, Marianne Coker returned. She carried a paper bag from the diner and insisted he eat something. "You look like you haven't seen a bed in weeks," she said. Reyes smiled faintly. "You sound like my ex-wife." "I'm a teacher." Scolding comes with the job. They sat on a picnic bench overlooking the water. The air smelled of pine and gasoline. Marianne stared at the divers' buoys. "When we were kids, we thought the lake never froze all the way. You could hear it breathing at night, the ice cracking like thunder. We'd tell ghost stories about what lived underneath." "What kind of stories?" he asked. She hesitated. "That if you stood on the dock after midnight, you could hear the missing ones calling your name." Reyes watched her face, the mixture of nostalgia and fear. "Did you ever hear them?" A long pause. "Once, the winter after Eddie disappeared. I woke up to knocking, slow, rhythmic, from under the floorboards. Mama said it was the pipes." She looked at him, eyes glossy. "I think it was him." He wanted to tell her grief made echoes, but something in her voice stopped him. That evening, Clara entered the motel room carrying a portable projector. "You need to see this," she said. Sanchez had managed to restore part of the Super 8 reel. The image jittered to life on the wall. Children lining up by the lake. Counselors waving. The colors were washed, all yellows and greens, but the smiles were real. Then, the film jumped. The frame darkened. The camera shifted to a dim corridor lined with wooden walls. A flashlight beam wavered, catching glimpses of doors marked with numbers. Clara whispered, "Looks like the basement under the dining hall." In the final seconds, the lens turned toward a sign nailed above one door. Locker 12. Then the reel snapped. Reyes froze. "Locker 12, he repeated. "Same number as the key pendant." Clara nodded. "We need to open that room." They reached the camp after dusk. The trees crowded close, their branches slick with rain. Reyes forced the dining hall door until the hinges gave with a shriek. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and rodent droppings. Their flashlights cut narrow tunnels through the darkness. Posters still clung to the walls. "Safety first. Swim buddy system. Make new friends." All curling, all ghosted with mildew. They found the basement door near the kitchen. A padlock hung broken. Steps descended into a concrete tunnel that smelled of earth and old water. "Watch your footing," Reyes said. At the bottom lay a corridor lined with metal lockers, each numbered in faded black paint. Most stood ajar, empty. Only one remained sealed, 12. Clara held out the pendant key. Her hand shook slightly. Reyes took it, slid it into the lock. It turned with a brittle click. Inside sat a wooden box wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it carefully. The box contained a reel-to-reel audio tape, a stack of typed forms stamped "Confidential," State Youth Program 1984, and a photograph of 6 children in hospital gowns, each with electrodes taped to their temples. Clara whispered, "What is this?" Reyes stared at the photo. "Not a camp," he said softly. "An experiment." Back at the motel, he threaded the tape into an old player borrowed from evidence storage. Static filled the room, followed by a man's voice. Measured, clinical. Session 9, June 4th. Subject A displayed resistance to immersion protocol. Subject C responded positively to auditory stimulus. Reyes felt his stomach knot. "Immersion protocol." The man continued, oblivious to the future horror of his words. "Memory retention improved after induced hypoxia. Recommend increased duration." He stopped the tape, hand trembling. "They drowned them," he said. Clara's face was pale. "On purpose?" He nodded slowly. "To see what they'd remember when revived." A silence thickened between them, a silence that seemed to carry the weight of decades. Finally, he said, "We'll need to find whoever funded this." Clara looked at him. "What if it was Devereaux?" Reyes rewound the tape and listened again. This time, at the end of the recording, another voice murmured, barely audible, "Dr. Devereaux, you're exceeding parameters." He leaned closer. "Dr. Devereaux," he repeated. The counselor had never been a counselor. He'd been the one running the experiment. The next morning brought headlines screaming, "Secret experiment at Glass Lake." Someone had leaked the tape. Reyes suspected the sheriff's office. The county needed distance from whatever nightmare was surfacing. He shut off the television and stared out the motel window. The lake shimmered faintly in the distance, the mist curling like breath. For the first time, he understood why locals said it was alive. Because maybe it was. Maybe it remembered everything. Late afternoon, Reyes walked the shoreline alone. Wind rippled the water into long silver scars. Somewhere beneath that surface lay more than bones. There were the voices of children, the residue of fear, the echoes of men who thought they could manipulate memory like clay. He knelt, touched the water. It was colder than it should have been. A reflection flickered. Not his own. For an instant he saw a face staring back from below the surface, pale and small. Eyes open, lips moving soundlessly. He jerked back. The image vanished. Behind him, Clara called out, "Sir, you need to see this." She held up her phone, showing a photograph from a public records search. It was Devereaux's official portrait, taken in 1991, but the signature below read Dr. Charles D. Arevos. Reyes read it twice. "He changed his name." "Not just that," she said. "He got a research grant from the state hospital in Austin." Same year the camp shut down, Reyes pocketed his gloves. "Then that's where we go next." He glanced once more at the lake. The wind hissed across its surface, whispering through the reeds. The water gave nothing back, but he felt its promise. "Come closer. There's more beneath." The drive to Austin took 3 hours of silence, broken only by the hum of the tires. Clara stared out the window, jotting notes, while Reyes kept his focus on the highway ribboning south through the pines. Every few miles, he glanced at the rear-view mirror, half expecting another car to tail them. Old habits from years chasing cases that didn't want to be solved. By the time the skyline appeared, the gray shoulders of the Capitol dome rising above low clouds, the sun had dissolved into a smudge of amber. Austin State Hospital sat behind iron gates that hadn't changed since the 19th century. The main building looked almost stately, with white columns and ivy-choked walls. Only the buzzing security lights betrayed its true nature. Inside, the corridors smelled of disinfectant and age. Paint peeled from the walls like thin skin. The receptionist's smile was mechanical. "We're here to review historical records," Reyes said, flashing his badge. "Dr. Charles D. Arevos, employed 1991 through 1996. The woman frowned at her monitor. "You'll need clearance from administration." He slid a folded letter across the counter. "Signed by the county DA." That changed her posture. "3rd floor, East Wing, Archive Room 302, but I doubt you'll find much. Most of our paper files were transferred to digital storage decades ago." Reyes gave a polite nod. "We'll manage." The elevator groaned its way upward, the bulbs flickering overhead. On the 3rd floor, the air was colder, quieter. They followed a sign marked "Restricted Archives" until they reached a door with a rusted handle. Inside, dust hung in visible layers, stirred by their flashlights. Clara scanned the shelves. Half these boxes haven't been touched in years. Reyes found the section labeled E-F. He crouched, reading faded handwriting on masking tape until he found one marked Arevos, CD-Personnel. The folder inside contained a single form, a resignation letter dated July 12, 1996. It was brief, typed, unsigned. "To whom it may concern, I am terminating my position effective immediately. The project has achieved parameters beyond expectation. Continuing would endanger the integrity of the work." Clara looked over his shoulder. "Endanger how?" He turned the page. Attached was a memo from a hospital director. "Dr. Arevos's behavior has grown erratic. Reports of unapproved sessions with pediatric patients. Claims of residual consciousness transfer via immersion therapy. Recommend suspension." Clara exhaled sharply. "Residual consciousness transfer. That's what they called it," Reyes kept reading. The memo ended with a handwritten note. "Case 46B. Subject relocation pending." He tapped the number. "Glass Lake's official file number. How could that follow him here?" Reyes stared at the paper. "Because the experiment didn't end at the camp." He moved it. They followed the paper trail to the basement records vault. The hallway lights flickered as if reluctant to guide them. A guard at the checkpoint looked up from his magazine, sighed, and buzzed them through. Rows of steel cabinets lined the vault. Clara pulled open drawers, scanning for anything labeled Echo. Most were empty. "Over here," Reyes said. He'd found a small fireproof safe embedded in the wall. The label read Project Echo, Level 4. He motioned for Clara's toolkit. After a few tense minutes, the latch gave way with a metallic pop. Inside lay a reel of audio tape, several Polaroids, and a thick black binder stamped State Grant 91-04-E. They spread the materials on a table under the humming fluorescent light. The binder's first page was a proposal. Objective: to study post-traumatic memory fragmentation in juvenile subjects through induced hypoxic immersion followed by guided dream recall. Sponsor: Texas State Behavioral Research Initiative, TSBRI. Lead investigator: Dr. Charles D. Arevos, Ph.D. The next section contained progress logs. Subjects exhibit auditory overlap, spontaneous repetition of prior sessions' dialogue by new participants. Echo phenomenon observed. Hypothesis: consciousness imprint persists within medium water beyond biological host. Further trials required. Clara's voice trembled. He believed the water kept their memories. Reyes nodded. And he called it the echo. The Polaroids were worse. 12 children sitting in a therapy room, heads wired to electrodes, each face blurred by motion as if caught mid-scream. Behind them stood a man in a white coat, Arevos, unmistakable even through distortion. In one photo, his hand rested on a girl's shoulder. Beneath it, in red marker, someone had written, "She remembers." Clara swallowed hard. My God! He turned over the last photo. On the back, a number was scrawled. P.O. Box 1784, Bastrop. Private storage, he said. If he moved his materials off-site, that's where we'll find them. As he closed the binder, something caught his eye. A thin, handwritten note tucked behind the last page. The water listens. It does not forgive. Outside, night had fallen. The hospital's facade glowed in sodium light, windows reflecting the dark. Reyes leaned against the car, reading the memo again. You think the state knew? Clara asked quietly. They funded it, he said. Maybe they didn't know how far he'd go, but they paid for the silence afterward. She glanced toward the building. How many kids? Officially? 12, but that's only what they recorded. He lit a cigarette, the ember flaring in the damp air. The rest, they called non-viable results. They drove east toward Bastrop, following the back roads that wound through pine forest and swamp. The fog thickened until the world felt muffled. Reyes's mind replayed the phrase residual consciousness transfer. If the lake was the medium, if he'd used water to preserve fragments of the children's memories, then the thaw might not have just revealed their remains. It might have released something. He didn't mention it aloud, but he saw Clara glance at the lake road whenever headlights passed, as if afraid something unseen followed them. The P.O. box led to a small postal depot on the outskirts of Bastrop, the kind used by contractors and small businesses. The clerk, an older woman with reading glasses on a chain, frowned when they showed her the number. That one hasn't been opened in 20 years, she said. But I remember the man. Doctor, he called himself. Quiet type, always paid in cash. You still have records? Reyes asked. She shuffled through a file drawer, produced a yellowed form. Last forwarding address listed was an old cabin by the Colorado River. Condemned now, I think. Flooded out years ago. Reyes took the slip of paper. We'll check it out. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt track swallowed by kudzu. The roof sagged like a broken spine. Inside, everything smelled of mold and rusted metal. A table stood in the center, covered with jars of murky liquid. In each jar floated a small cassette tape. Clara whispered, "He stored them in water." Reyes approached, heart pounding. The labels were written in a child's hand. Lydia, Mark, Annabelle, Thomas. He pulled one jar closer. The tape inside had warped, its magnetic ribbon twisting like seaweed. Clara pointed to a journal lying open beside them. The first page read, "Memory is a current. It flows until it finds another vessel." Reyes flipped through. Entries detailed ongoing experiments, not just at Glass Lake, but across multiple sites, hospitals, camps, even private homes. One passage was dated 1996, the year he vanished. Subject 11 responded beyond expectation. Immersion produced vocal manifestation from previous case. Voice identified as Subject 3. Deceased. The echo grows stronger. Clara stepped back, pale. He thought he could bring them back. Or keep them trapped, Reyes said. In the final entry, scrawled hastily, were coordinates leading straight back to Glass Lake. They left the cabin just as thunder began rolling through the trees. On the drive north, the rain came again, a downpour that seemed to chase them. At one point, Clara leaned forward. "Do you hear that?" "Just rain." "No." The sound underneath he listened. Beneath the hiss of the wipers came a faint, rhythmic knock, tap, 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 from somewhere within the car's frame. It stopped whenever he slowed. When they reached the motel, he checked the trunk. Empty. Only mud streaks across the bumper. Inside, Clara uploaded photos of the journal to the evidence drive. "This changes everything," she said. "We're not just dealing with murder. It's experimentation on human memory. The kind of thing people bury for good reason." Reyes leaned against the window, staring at the rain-smeared glass. "And whatever he did, it's not finished." The lights flickered once, twice. The power grid in these parts always gave up first in storms. But this flicker had rhythm. 2 short pulses, one long, like a coded signal. He turned toward Clara. "Did you see?" Her laptop screen glowed blue, though the power was out. Across the blank desktop, faint letters appeared, as if typed by an invisible hand. "The water listens." The cursor blinked twice, then vanished. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Finally, Reyes whispered, "He left something behind." The thunder answered him, rolling across the hills toward Glass Lake, a sound like distant applause, or knocking from beneath a frozen surface. The storm hadn't let up by dawn. Thunder rolled low and continuous, a living thing pacing outside the motel. Detective Reyes woke to the smell of damp carpet and ozone. The digital clock beside the bed blinked 12 o'clock. The power had failed sometime during the night. Clara sat at the desk, laptop open, face lit by its cold glow. "It started playing by itself," she said quietly. On screen, the same phrase repeated, "The water listens." Scrolling upward in endless rows, the cursor flickered at the bottom like a heartbeat. Reyes unplugged the machine. The words vanished instantly, leaving only the reflection of the rain-streaked window. "How long has it been doing that?" "Since 3 a.m., Clara said. "No network connection, no external input." "I checked twice." He rubbed his jaw. "Could be corrupted data from the echo files, or some kind of trigger script." She looked at him. "You don't believe that?" He didn't answer. Truth was, he didn't know what he believed anymore. By noon, the rain slowed enough for them to drive back to Glass Lake. The water had risen, swallowing the lower docks. Police tape fluttered limply against the posts. Divers had suspended operations until visibility improved. Dr. Sanchez met them at the main tent, her hair pulled into a fraying bun. "You'll want to see this," she said. Inside a cooler chest lay a newly recovered skull. The features were delicate, jaw unbroken. But the real shock was the object clenched between the teeth, a fragment of metal shaped like a small recorder microphone. Reyes bent closer. "That's not possible." "It's the same model used in the hospital's echo program," Sanchez said. "Old, early 90s. Found lodged in the cranial cavity, implanted," Clara asked. "Or forced in post-mortem." Reyes straightened slowly. The hum of the tent lights seemed louder, oppressive. "Bag it and get it to Austin. No press, no leaks." Sanchez nodded. "Understood." When she left, Clara whispered, "You think he was recording them? After they died?" Maybe he wanted to hear what they remembered. Outside, thunder cracked again, shaking droplets from the pine branches. The lake's surface rippled as if something beneath had stirred. At sunset, They drove to the abandoned cabins that once housed the campers. Most were half collapsed, roofs caved under years of rot. They moved carefully, flashlights sweeping over graffiti and decayed bunks. In one cabin, Reyes noticed initials carved into the wood above a bed frame. LM plus EK. Lily Martins and Eddie Kosher, Clara murmured. They must have shared this cabin. He photographed the carving, then crouched to examine the floorboards. Water stains formed strange, almost circular patterns, as though something had been set there and leaked for a long time. He pried up a loose plank. Beneath it lay a small, rusted tin box. Inside, a strip of film negatives, half destroyed, and a single Polaroid still intact, taken at night, judging from the flash. It showed a child standing ankle-deep in water, eyes closed, arms outstretched as if sleepwalking. A hand, adult, gloved, gripped the child's shoulder. On the back, someone had written, Session 3, Retrieval Successful. Clara whispered, he used the lake itself as part of the therapy. Reyes pocketed the photo. He was using the lake as a medium. They both looked toward the water through the broken cabin window. Lightning illuminated it for a split second, flat, silver, endless. They returned to the pier just as the sky bruised violet. Deputies were packing up for the night when one of the divers approached, removing his mask. His face was pale, lips trembling. Detective, you'll want to see this. He led them to the shoreline where a black plastic sheet covered something long and narrow. When Reyes pulled it back, he froze. It was a child's coffin. Wooden, waterlogged, its edges chewed by time. A brass plate still clung to the lid. The name etched into it was Annabelle. Clara pressed a hand to her mouth. That's one of the missing. Reyes knelt, brushing away mud. Where did you find it? About 10 feet under near the north inlet, the diver said. But it wasn't buried. It was anchored down with chains. Reyes stared at the lake, thunder growling again in the distance. He wanted them preserved, waiting. The diver shivered. Detective, there's more down there. Dozens, maybe more than we can count. Reyes rose, rain beginning to fall again in cold needles. Seal off the area. No one dives until I say. As the deputies scrambled to obey, lightning forked across the sky, reflecting on the water like cracks in glass. Later, in the motel, Reyes sat by the window with the Polaroid and the brass plate on the table before him. Clara slept fitfully in the other bed. The thunder had drifted east, leaving only the steady patter of a rain. He studied the photograph again. The child in the water, the gloved hand, the faint glimmer of something metallic on the wrist, a bracelet, or an identification band like those used in hospitals. He flipped the plate over. Scratched faintly into the back were 3 letters, ECH, Echo. He felt a chill crawl through him. The motel lights flickered once, twice. The reflection in the window darkened, and for a heartbeat he thought he saw movement on the lake far beyond, a ripple spreading outward from the center, though no wind stirred. Then the power went out completely. In the darkness came a faint sound. Not thunder, not wind. Something rhythmic, deliberate, knocking from under the floor. The sound came again. 3 slow knocks, then silence. Reyes stood, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting across the narrow room. The floorboards trembled faintly, as if the building itself was breathing. Clara stirred awake, pushing herself up on her elbows. What is that? He raised a hand for quiet. The knocking started once more, moving from one side of the room to the other, measured, patient. He crouched, pried up a loose board with his pocket knife. Underneath lay a shallow crawl space no higher than a child's chest. The beam caught a glint of metal, an old drain pipe leading straight down into the earth. The sound was coming from inside it. Clara leaned beside him, voice barely above a whisper. Something's echoing up from the lake. He aimed the light deeper. Water glistened far below, and for an instant he saw bubbles rising through the shaft. The rhythmic knocks became a hollow voice, distorted by distance, a word repeated again and again, impossible to mistake once the pattern formed. "Listen!" Reyes replaced the board and stood quickly, heart pounding. "Pack up. We're moving out." They left the motel within minutes, rain pelting their coats. By the time they reached the car, the power in the entire strip had failed. Every window dark. Only the lake in the distance glowed faintly under lightning, its surface restless as though whispering to itself. They parked by the old camp gate. The storm had stripped branches from the pines, scattering them like bones. Reyes grabbed a portable floodlight and started toward the dining hall basement, the place where Locker 12 waited. Inside, water dripped steadily from the ceiling. Their lights swung over the row of lockers, glinting off the damp concrete. The door of number 12 stood ajar. They'd left it that way after recovering the tapes. Now the floor inside shimmered with a thin layer of water that hadn't been there before. Clara aimed her light downward. It's seeping in from the wall. Reyes stepped closer. The water was clear, unnaturally cold. Something floated just below the surface, a strip of plastic film. He reached in with gloved fingers and pulled it out. A reel segment, labeled in faded ink. Session 0. They exchanged a look. "He recorded everything," Clara whispered. Reyes unspooled a few frames toward the light. The first image showed a room like this one, concrete and bare. In the corner stood a steel tank, half filled with water. The second frame showed the tank covered, a child's hand pressed against the glass from inside. He forced the reel back into its canister. "We're done here tonight." As they turned to leave, the floodlight flickered. For an instant the beam scattered, and in that pulse of darkness the reflection of the tank shimmered on the wet floor. Only now it wasn't empty. A figure stood inside, motionless, watching them. When the light steadied again, the floor was bare. They drove to the sheriff's office, soaked and silent. Reyes spread the reel and Polaroid on the desk while Harlan poured coffee with shaking hands. "You're telling me a state-funded doctor drowned kids to trap their memories in a lake," Harlan said finally. "You hear yourself?" Reyes met his gaze. "You saw the remains. You heard the tapes. Whether you believe his theory or not, the bodies are real." Harlan rubbed his temples. "The county can't handle this." "We'll have to call in the bureau, not yet," Reyes said. "Not until I know how deep it goes." He pointed to the coordinates from the journal. "There's something under the north inlet. The divers said they found coffins anchored there. I think there's a structure beneath the lake." The sheriff shook his head. "You dive that place at night. You won't come back." Reyes looked out the window. Dawn was smearing the horizon, pale and thin. "Then we go at first light." At sunrise, the lake was still again, as if the storm had been only a dream. Mist clung to the surface like smoke. Reyes pulled on a wetsuit borrowed from the dive team. The air smelled of algae and metal. Clara adjusted his harness. "You don't have to go down yourself." "I need to see it," he said. He slipped into the water. The cold bit through the neoprene like teeth. The world narrowed to bubbles and the beam of his headlamp. Silt rose in soft clouds as he descended along the rope. At 20 feet he found the first chain, links thick as his wrist, disappearing into the murk below. He followed it until the beam caught the outline of a wood, then iron, then something unmistakably geometric. A platform, a hatch. Letters etched across the metal read ECHOFACILITY1. His breath quickened inside the mask. He touched the latch. It swung open easily, releasing a bloom of black water. Inside was a corridor leading downward into darkness. On the wall, a series of small lights blinked, still powered after all these years. The pressure in his ears built until it was almost pain. He turned to ascend. and saw movement at the edge of the beam. A shape drifted from one doorway to another, small and pale. The shape of a child. He froze. The figure turned its head, eyes reflecting silver, mouth opening in a stream of bubbles. No sound, only the ripple of the word he could read from the shape of its lips. "Listen." Panic surged. He kicked upward, lungs burning, the hatch below swinging shut, as if pushed by invisible hands. When he broke the surface, Clara and the divers pulled him onto the dock. He tore off his mask, gasping. "There's something built under there," he managed. "Still powered. Still occupied." The divers looked at one another, uneasy. The lake behind them was utterly calm again, the ripples already gone. That night, back at the motel, Reyes lay awake listening to the distant lapping of water against the shore. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that pale face suspended in the dark. The whisper followed him even into half-sleep. "Listen." He sat up, turned on the lamp. The recorder from the evidence bag lay on the table where he'd set it earlier, the tiny microphone recovered from the skull. Its indicator light blinked once, though it had no battery attached. A hiss of static filled the room, then a child's voice, faint and wet, as if spoken from beneath the lake. "We remember." Reyes stared at the device, unable to move. The voice came again, overlapping now, many voices, dozens, boys, girls, merging into one trembling chorus. "We remember." Then silence. The light went out. The sun barely touched the treetops when the divers returned to Glass Lake. Mist curled off the surface, veiling the world in pale smoke. Detective Reyes stood on the dock pulling on his gloves, his body still aching from the cold of yesterday's dive. He had not slept. The echo of those children's voices still rang somewhere behind his ribs. Clara was already coordinating with the technical team, two specialists from Austin University who had volunteered equipment under the pretense of a geological survey. Reyes watched them unload waterproof drones and fiber-optic cameras. "We'll send the crawler first," one of them said. "If that tunnel's stable, you can go in afterward." Reyes nodded. He had no intention of waiting for safety clearance. The drone slid into the water with a quiet splash. On the monitor, grainy light cut through darkness. Silt, scattered bones of trees, and then the metal hatch he'd opened yesterday. The camera tilted down the corridor beyond. Pipes glinted like ribs. Every few meters, a small green diode blinked. Alive. Clara leaned closer. "Power's still running." "That shouldn't be possible." "Underground generator," Reyes said. "He built this place to last." A shape moved past the lens, too fast to identify. The technician cursed softly, trying to refocus, but the feed dissolved into static. Then, faintly, a child's hum threaded through the speaker, off-key, rhythmic. The sound cut as suddenly as it began. Reyes exhaled. "I'm going down." The lake swallowed him whole. At 15 feet, the world turned green. At 30, it went black. He followed the guide rope until the beam of his light struck the hatch. The door gaped open, water sliding in and out as though the lake itself were breathing. He entered. The passage sloped gently downward. Air pockets shimmered against the ceiling, proof that a chamber below still held atmosphere. His headlamp traced over walls of reinforced concrete, coated in slime. Every few steps he passed another blinking diode, each pulse a heartbeat in the dark. A steel sign hung crooked above the next hatch, Test Chamber, Immersion Study. He forced it open. The water inside was shallower, waist-deep, and warm, as though heated from below. The chamber itself was circular, lined with observation windows that looked into smaller rooms beyond. A control console sat half-submerged at the center. He climbed onto it, wiping silt away from the surface. Beneath the grime were rows of toggle switches labeled in tidy letters. Subject input /memory play Disappearances/audio retrieval. Jesus, he murmured. He keyed his mic. Clara, I'm in. There's machinery down here. Intact. Her voice crackled through static. We're getting intermittent video, but we can hear you. How deep are you? About 40 feet. Chamber appears sealed. Heat source unknown. He hesitated, then flipped the switch marked audio retrieval. A long hiss answered, followed by faint splashes, as if footsteps moved in the surrounding rooms. Then a voice. Soft, female, calm. Begin session 1. Subject is submerged. Heart rate elevated, another voice overlapped. Higher, trembling. Please, I can't breathe. Reyes killed the switch. The echo of that plea filled the chamber long after the sound died. He backed away from the console. Through one of the observation windows, something shifted, a shadow leaning close to the glass from the other side. 2 small hands pressed outward, fingers splayed. The outline of a child's face formed behind them, eyes wide, mouth moving without sound. Then it vanished, leaving only the reflection of his own light. Reyes surfaced 10 minutes later, lungs burning, voice rough through the comm. Clara helped him onto the dock. What did you see? Proof, he said, and maybe survivors. She stared. After 30 years, not in the way you think. He described the chamber, the hands at the window, the recording. By the end, his voice was hoarse. Clara said quietly, if that place is still active, someone's maintaining it. Reyes looked toward the far shore, where the trees grew thickest. Then he's still here. By afternoon, the state police had cordoned off the entire lake. Reporters swarmed the roadblocks, drones buzzed overhead. Sheriff Harlan met Reyes near the perimeter, face drawn. You've stirred a hornet's nest, he said. State investigators, maybe even federal. They're sending a forensic sub tomorrow. Tomorrow might be too late, Reyes answered. That facility's powered. Someone will clean it before they arrive. Harlan frowned. You think Devereaux's alive? Reyes looked back at the lake. The sunlight broke through clouds, glancing off the water in blinding shards. Alive, he said, or something that remembers him. That night, as they packed gear for another dive, a vehicle's headlights swept across the motel wall and faded. Reyes went to the window. No car, only the empty road glistening from rain. A moment later, a soft tap sounded at the door. Clara reached for her weapon, but Reyes gestured for silence and opened it. No one stood there, only an envelope on the mat, damp from mist. Inside was a photograph, Polaroid style. It showed the lake at dusk, shot from a high angle, as if taken that evening. In the reflection of the water, faint but visible, was the silhouette of a man standing on the dock, his face obscured by sunglasses. On the back, written in a shaky hand, "You're listening now." Reyes sat on the edge of the motel bed, turning the photograph over and over. The paper felt warm, as if it had just come from the camera. "He's watching us," Clara said quietly. "Or someone wants us to think he is." Reyes placed the photo beneath a lamp. "Either way, he's close." Outside, night pressed down on the lake. The rain had eased to a mist. Lightning flickered far away behind the hills. Every few seconds the motel sign buzzed, filling the silence with an electric pulse that reminded him of the blinking diodes beneath the water. He couldn't stay still. He packed his camera, flashlight, and the spare oxygen tank, then looked at Clara. "We go back now, before they shut us out." She didn't argue. They drove through the fog without headlights until the road ended at the gravel turnout. The lake spread before them, black and gleaming like oil. Wind combed the reeds in long, whispering strokes. They launched a small inflatable raft and drifted toward the coordinates he had memorized. The world narrowed to the sound of oars and the faint slap of water against rubber. When the depth finder began to chirp, Reyes slipped into the wetsuit again. "Keep the comms open," he said. "If I lose signal, wait 10 minutes and pull the raft toward shore." "Don't take 10, Clara said. Come back sooner." He managed a small smile, then dropped backward into the cold. The descent was slower this time. He followed the guide rope hand over hand, every movement cautious. At 40 feet, the beam of his headlamp caught the familiar hatch of Echo Facility 1. The door hung open, water moving in slow breaths through the frame. Inside, the chamber lights were dim but steady. He swam through the main corridor to a new door marked Control Bay. When he pushed it open, bubbles swarmed around him, clearing to reveal a wall of flickering monitors. Most displayed static. One showed a live feed of the lake above, distorted by ripples. A shadow moved across that image. A boat, small, solitary. Clara's raft. He turned a dial on the console. A recording began to play, faint under the hiss of water. Subject 9. Termination complete. Memory retained. The water remembers another voice, older, rougher, replied, "You've gone too far, Charles." "Not far enough." Reyes's pulse hammered. The second voice. He recognized it from somewhere deep in memory. He flipped through mental images until one surfaced. An interview tape from the Holbrook case years ago. The anonymous consultant who'd guided the behavioral analysis. A man who'd walked away before trial. The name listed only as Cia Rivos. He'd met Devereaux once and never known it. The monitors flickered again, frames shifting from static to moving images. Grainy footage of the camp in summer. Children running, counselors waving. Then the picture twisted, colors bleeding. Each child turned toward the camera one by one, eyes black as the lake. The water level in the chamber began to rise. Reyes reached for the exit latch, but it jammed. Pressure forced him upward until his shoulders struck the ceiling. A voice whispered through his headset. Not Clara's, not his own. "You open the door." "Now listen." A flood of sound filled his ears. Fragments of laughter, screams, murmured names. 12 voices overlapping. The drowned chorus from his nightmares. They rose until the headset buzzed and went dead. He kicked upward, forcing the hatch free. Water gushed through like breath released from lungs too long held. He shot toward the surface, lungs on fire. Clara pulled him into the raft, coughing, shivering. "What happened?" He could barely speak. "He's been here, all along, watching." From the center of the lake came a low rumble. The water began to churn as if something vast moved beneath it. A column of bubbles rose, spreading concentric waves toward them. Then a burst of light flared beneath the surface, cold, blue, almost electrical. Clara gripped the raft's edge. "What is that?" Reyes stared into the glow. "A generator," he said, though it sounded like a lie. "Or a signal." The light faded, leaving only darkness and the whisper of water. They paddled back to shore in silence. The trees were motionless, the air heavy. Behind them, the lake lay smooth again, its surface unbroken except for a single ripple that traveled slowly outward, as though following them. Back in the motel, Reyes sat wrapped in a towel, teeth chattering. Clara connected his helmet camera to the laptop. The video showed the descent clearly, the consoles, the monitors, but when the light had flared, the footage distorted. For one frame only, the image sharpened. A man standing inside the control bay, his reflection mirrored in the glass. Sunglasses, dark hair, the faint outline of a smile. Clara froze the frame. "That's him." Reyes stared at the screen. The timestamp read 00:00:00, no date, no hour, as if time itself had stopped when the image was captured. He whispered, "Devereaux never left the lake." He became it outside, wind swept across the water, carrying a single, low note, a hum that could have been machinery, or a song too faint to belong to the living. The lamp flickered once, twice, then steadied. On the window, condensation traced words with slow precision, letter by letter, forming the same message they had seen before. "The water listens." Morning came colorless. Fog clung low over Glass Lake, muting every shape into gray. Reyes woke from an hour's sleep with the echo of that underwater whisper still lodged behind his eyes. When he moved, his body answered with pain, cold bitten muscles, bruises blooming across his ribs. Clara sat at the small motel desk, eyes hollow from her own sleeplessness, replaying the footage frame by frame. Every time the generator hum peaks, the static clears for exactly 1 second, she said quietly. Then it resets, like it's breathing. Reyes poured coffee, black and bitter. A system reboot? Maybe. Or a pulse, a signal to something we haven't seen yet. He leaned against the wall, watching the video flicker on her laptop. The frozen frame of Devereaux, the man in the reflection, looked impossibly calm, as if posing for the camera. Reyes's mind turned over the years of case files, the psychological profiles, the unending lists of the missing. Every pattern had pointed to a human mind behind it. Now, he wasn't sure. "Did you notice his shadow?" Clara asked suddenly. He frowned. "What about it?" She zoomed in on the still image. The figure's shadow didn't fall toward the light. It rose upward, like smoke drawn back into the dark. Reyes rubbed his face. "We're too deep in this," he muttered. "And now the feds are coming. They'll close it down before we get answers. Then we move first." By midday, the lakefront was crawling with vehicles. State investigators in gray windbreakers set up mobile tents. Divers in dry suits prepped sonar rigs. Sheriff Harlan looked 10 years older. "You two stirred up a storm," he said, greeting them grimly. "Orders are to secure everything until federal oversight arrives. They're already calling this contamination of evidence." Reyes flashed his badge. "We're still attached to the case." "Not anymore. They're rewriting jurisdiction as we speak. You'll be spectators by sundown." Clara kept her voice low. "Then we need to get into that facility before nightfall." Harlan sighed. "You didn't hear this from me, but the forensics sub will make its first run at 1400. If there's something you need, do it before then." Reyes gave a brief nod of thanks and pulled Clara aside. "We've got 4 hours." "To find what?" He tapped the photo that still sat in his jacket pocket. "Whatever's behind this reflection." They drove around the far side of the lake where the forest grew dense. Old maintenance trails wound between pines and limestone outcroppings. After a mile, the terrain sloped downward toward a cluster of rusted fencing half buried in leaves. Beyond it stood a collapsed structure, once a pump house, judging by the remnants of pipes and gauges. Clara crouched beside the concrete base. Footprints. Fresh Reyes followed the trail into the trees until he saw the narrow mouth of a shaft cut into the earth, sealed with a metal door. The padlock was new. He pulled his knife and worked the mechanism until it gave way. The air inside was stale, heavy with iron. Steps descended into darkness. They followed their lights down, the beams trembling on wet stone. At the bottom lay a corridor identical in construction to the one beneath the lake. Same metal plating, same warning stripes along the walls. "This connects to Echo Facility 1, Clara said. "Or it did," Reyes replied. "Let's see where it breaks." They moved through a series of empty chambers, storage, filtration, what might have been a dormitory. Rusted beds lined the walls, chains still fixed to their frames. Old toys sat on a table, wooden blocks, a doll missing its head. Clara picked up a small tag lying in the dust. The ink had faded, but one word remained. Subject 12. "Children lived here," she whispered. "Not lived," Reyes corrected. "Observed." In the next room, they found an archive. Shelves of waterproof containers labeled with dates spanning decades. Reyes pried one open. Inside were stacks of cassette tapes, each marked with a case number, 46B-1, 46B-2, and so on. He pulled out a portable recorder from his pack and slid in the first tape. Static. Then a woman's voice. Clinical, detached. Echo Study, Session 1. Subject 12 exhibits full auditory sensitivity. The water amplifies memory beyond measurable threshold. Recommend increased duration. The sound of water splashing, then a child sobbing softly in the background. Please, I want to go home. The tape clicked off. Clara's hands shook as she ejected it. How could this run for so long without anyone knowing? Someone funded it, Reyes said. Someone still does. They opened another container. Inside, folders sealed in plastic, stamped with the same insignia they'd seen on Devereaux's personnel file. A circular logo depicting a stylized eye inside a wave. Clara frowned. I've seen this before. In state medical archives, funding for neural trauma rehabilitation experiments. Reyes scanned the pages. The signatures were blacked out, but one line at the bottom remained clear. Facility maintained under Federal Exemption 46B, active study. He looked up. It's never been closed. A deep vibration trembled through the floor, shaking dust from the pipes. The lights overhead flickered to life one by one, powered by something below. Someone knows we're here, Clara said. Reyes drew his gun. Or we triggered it. They followed the sound down another corridor until it ended at a heavy vault door labeled Primary Control. A keypad beside it blinked red. Waiting. Clara studied the panel. It's old tech. Manual override possible. She pried off the casing and crossed 2 wires. The light turned green. The door groaned open, releasing a rush of warm air tinged with ozone. Beyond lay a vast chamber half filled with water. At its center rose a cylindrical glass tank lit from below, shimmering with pale blue light. Inside the tank floated what looked like ribbons of translucent material. At first he thought seaweed, until he saw the faint outlines of faces forming and dissolving within it. Clara whispered, "Is that?" "Memory," Reyes said. "What's left of them?" The tank pulsed once, as though responding to his voice. Then the surface broke, releasing a stream of bubbles that carried faint whispers. Childlike, pleading. Reyes stepped closer, mesmerized. It's recording still. It never stopped. The glass tank's surface shimmered, distorting Reyes's reflection into a dozen fragments. He reached out instinctively, palm hovering an inch from the curved wall. The surface vibrated in response, a low hum building beneath the floor. "Don't touch it," Clara said sharply, stepping closer with her flashlight. The beam revealed veins of light running through the water like neural pathways, pulsing in sync with the hum. "It's reacting to proximity," Reyes murmured. "It's listening." "Then let's stop giving it something to hear," she muttered, scanning for a power source. At the far end of the chamber stood a control console surrounded by monitors and cables. One of the screens flickered to life as they approached, lines of green text cascading across it. Echo process, online. Primary memory pool, 68% capacity, last entry, March 14th, 1992, subject 12. That's nearly the date the disappearances stopped, Clara said. Reyes typed cautiously on the terminal, the old keys clattering beneath his fingers. A new line appeared. User authorized, see Devereaux system query. He hesitated, then entered a single word. Where? The response came instantly. Location unknown. Subjects stored, memory active. A distorted child's laugh spilled from the nearby speaker, brief, broken, like static given voice. Clara flinched. "Reyes, kill the power." Before he could respond, the monitors flashed white. Across every screen appeared the same image, a man's face half obscured by shadow, sunglasses reflecting the tank's glow. "Detective," the voice said. It was Devereaux, older, rasped by years but unmistakable. "You shouldn't be here." Reyes's pulse surged. "Where are you?" "Everywhere you left open." The image glitched, stretching, reforming into the face of a boy, maybe 10 years old, eyes wide and empty. "We listen," the boy whispered. "We remember the water." The screens went black. Then the tank erupted. Water surged upward, spraying the room as alarms shrieked. The glass webbed with cracks, glowing brighter at each fracture. "Move!" Reyes shouted, grabbing Clara's arm. They ran as the tank imploded behind them, flooding the chamber with glowing water that hissed where it touched metal. They stumbled up the stairwell, the rising flood slapping against their boots. Behind them, the lights flickered out one by one, swallowed by darkness. The last thing Reyes heard before the door slammed shut was that soft, off-key hum. 12 notes, echoing up through the corridor. They emerged outside into gray daylight, gasping, soaked through. The lake lay silent again, its surface unbroken. From this side, the investigators' tents were visible across the water, tiny, distant shapes unaware of the storm beneath them. Clara leaned against a tree, shivering. "It's not just a machine. It's a graveyard." Reyes nodded slowly, and the grave's still thinking. He opened his palm. During the scramble, something had pressed into his hand. A small metal tag, no bigger than a coin, etched with a number. 12. The edges were warm. Clara stared. From the tank? He nodded. Or from whoever was still inside it. A low vibration trembled through the ground, subtle but steady, like the purr of an engine idling far below. Birds exploded from the tree line in a rush of wings. "Whatever we did," Reyes said quietly, "we woke it." That evening, the federal convoy arrived. Black SUVs, floodlights sweeping the perimeter. Men in unmarked jackets sealed the area with yellow tape and noise. Reyes and Clara watched from the motel balcony as the first teams moved toward the water. "They'll bury it," she said flatly. "Scrub the files, erase the data, and tell the press it was an equipment malfunction. Then we hold what they can't erase." He held up the metal tag. Proof something lived in there, or still does. She looked out over the lake. Mist rolled in again, curling like smoke around the dock where they had first stood. For a moment, the reflection of a man appeared on the water's surface, tall, still, watching. Then it rippled and was gone. Reyes whispered, "He's not done with us." Clara turned toward him, eyes dark. "Then we don't stop either." Later, when Reyes finally lay down, exhaustion dragging him toward sleep, the room's air conditioner clicked on. The hum rose slowly until it matched the same 12-note pattern from beneath the lake. The lamp flickered once, and the shadow of a child's hand slid briefly across the wall beside his bed, open, reaching, fading. Outside, Glass Lake reflected the stars like tiny trapped souls beneath its surface, each one pulsing faintly in time with the sound of the water. The next morning brought no sunrise, only a pale gray haze that made the trees seem half erased. Reyes stepped outside the motel room, coffee cooling in his hand, and watched the federal teams work across the lake. Black tents rose like wounds in the mist. Men in masks moved with clinical precision, lowering sensors into the water, sealing boxes of recovered debris. Clara joined him, wrapping her jacket tight. "They're calling it a containment operation. No public statement yet." "They won't make one," Reyes said. "The fewer questions, the easier to forget." A van door slammed. 2 agents carried out the broken fragments of the glass tank in sealed containers. Even from here, the shards glowed faintly blue under the morning light, like pieces of frozen lightning. Clara followed his gaze. "Still active, still remembering," he murmured. By noon, they were summoned to give statements. Inside the command tent, the air reeked of coffee and disinfectant. Monitors displayed live sonar maps of the lake's bottom. Reyes noted the absence of the words Echo Facility 1 anywhere on the screens. Instead, the site was labeled simply Zone A. A man in a dark suit, no badge, no name, led the questioning. Detective Reyes, Ms. Nguyen, we understand you were first on site after the discovery. You'll provide your data, then return to Austin. The case is now under federal jurisdiction. Reyes placed his drive on the table. All recordings, dive logs, audio, everything we collected. The man's eyes flicked up. You're certain that's complete? It's what the state authorized me to hand over, Reyes said evenly. He didn't mention the duplicate copy Clara had already hidden in her camera bag, nor the metal tag still taped to the inside of his wrist. When they were dismissed, Clara exhaled slowly. He knew. He just didn't care. They never do. He's not investigating, he's cleaning. That night they left the motel behind and drove east along the county highway, glassy rain streaking the windshield. For the first time in days, the lake wasn't visible, but in the rhythm of the wipers, Reyes swore he could hear faint notes, 12, repeating, hidden in the motor's hum. At a truck stop diner, they found temporary anonymity among neon and fried food. Clara sat across from him, sketching a diagram on a napkin. The tunnels, the control bay, the archive. Every location we found has some symbol of water and an eye, she said. It's not just Devereaux's signature. It's organizational. He nodded. Echo wasn't one man. It was infrastructure. Research grants, private labs, hospitals. He might have been the architect, but someone built the walls. Clara tapped the napkin's corner where she'd written a date. March 14th, 1992. Last recorded entry. If the system was still online when we entered, someone rebooted it recently. Reyes leaned back, listening to the muted hum of the diner's refrigerator. You think Devereaux's alive? She met his eyes. I think he's watching through every circuit we woke up. They reached Austin before dawn. Reyes's apartment sat on a quiet street, the city's lights smeared by drizzle. He hadn't been home in weeks, but the air inside felt recently disturbed. Faint scent of damp earth, footprints drying on the floorboards. He drew his gun automatically, sweeping the room. Nothing. But on the kitchen table lay an envelope identical to the one they'd found at the motel. Clara stood behind him as he opened it. Inside was a single Polaroid, edges wet as though just developed. It showed a reflection in a mirror. Reyes, standing where he stood now, gun in hand. In the reflection behind him loomed another figure. Tall, dark hair, the faint glint of sunglasses. On the back of the photo, handwritten in smudged ink. Case 46B isn't over. A drop of water fell onto the paper, though the ceiling was dry. Another followed. Clara tilted her head back. The sound came from the air vent, steady, rhythmic. Drip, drip, drip. Reyes climbed onto the counter and shone his flashlight inside. Condensation lined the duct, and beneath it, faint etchings scarred the metal. Small symbols repeating over and over, the eye within the wave. It's in the system, Clara whispered. Literally. Reyes pulled the vent cover off. A thin thread of water snaked down the wall, pooling on the floor. When he touched it, it vibrated faintly, humming at a frequency too low to hear, but strong enough to feel in his bones. We opened a channel, he said, and it followed us out. They left immediately, abandoning the apartment to the ghosts of condensation. As they drove south through the sleeping city, streetlights bent in the reflection of puddles like eyes half shut. Every radio frequency they tried was drowned by static. Then, between bursts of white noise, a child's voice whispered through the speakers. Detective, can you hear us now? Clara slammed the radio off. The silence that followed was worse. Ahead, lightning flashed, illuminating a stretch of highway that cut toward the hills, and for an instant, the silhouette of a man standing on the roadside, water dripping from his sleeves. Reyes didn't slow down. The figure on the roadside vanished in the rear-view mirror as soon as the car's headlights passed. For a few seconds there was only rain and the sound of the tires chewing gravel. Then, faintly, Something moved in the mirror again. Too fast to focus, a pale face gliding behind them, weightless as light on water. Clara gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. "Tell me you saw that." "I saw it," Reyes said. "Keep driving." They didn't speak again until they reached the outskirts of the city. Dawn was a dull bruise across the sky. Clara pulled the car onto an overlook where the ground fell away to a reservoir glittering far below. The lake's surface was still, featureless, but the air smelled faintly of brine, wrong for this far inland. Reyes stepped out into the wind. The horizon shimmered like heat on asphalt, bending light into watercolored distortions. For a moment he thought he saw children standing along the opposite ridge, silhouettes in a perfect line. When he blinked, they were gone. Clara joined him. "Every time the water shows up, we see them." "They're signals," he said. Echoes caught in reflection. Maybe Devereaux learned how to use it. She turned to him, hair plastered to her face by the wind. Use it for what? To stay. They drove again at nightfall, heading for Bastrop where the old postal depot still stood. Inside, dust motes floated in the light from a single hanging bulb. The clerk was gone, but the back office door hung open. Behind it sat a row of metal shelves, and on the middle one lay a single new package wrapped in brown paper, addressed simply, "Detective Reyes. Deliver to the water." He unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a reel of magnetic tape labeled Session 0. Final. Clara found an old cassette player in a drawer, loaded the tape, pressed play. At first, only static. Then Devereaux's voice. Calm, methodical. Experiment complete. Subject integration achieved. The medium remains responsive. The detective will arrive soon. Reyes's breath caught. The voice shifted, tone softening as though addressing him directly. "You're hearing this because you've already opened the door. They remember you now. Memory requires a listener." The tape clicked off. In the silence that followed, the reservoir wind howled through the cracks of the old building like a living thing. Clara stared at him. "He recorded a message for you before you ever found the case." "Not before," Reyes said slowly. "During." Outside, thunder rolled again. The same distant percussion that seemed to follow them from county to county. As they reached the car, their boots splashed through puddles that hadn't been there an hour ago. Rain had not fallen. The sky was clear. Yet water seeped from the cracks in the ground, gathering in perfect circles. "Reyes," Clara whispered. "It's rising." From each puddle came a faint vibration, a pulse syncing with his heartbeat. The reflections inside them deepened until they no longer showed sky or trees, only black water stretching forever downward. The first whisper drifted out, impossibly soft. "We remember." Another joined, then another, until the air shimmered with the sound of unseen children chanting beneath their feet. Reyes seized Clara's wrist. "Run!" They fled toward the car as the puddles rippled outward, merging into a single dark sheet that swallowed the road. Lightning flashed, and for one blinding instant, the entire reservoir below flared to life. A mosaic of faces staring upward through the water, eyes open, mouths moving in unison. When the light faded, the ground was dry again. They didn't stop driving until the city lights disappeared behind them. Hours later, parked on an empty stretch of desert highway, Reyes killed the engine. The silence pressed against them like weight. Clara leaned back, eyes closed. "What if this isn't haunting?" she said softly. "What if it's transmission?" A network still running through every drop of water that ever touched that lake, Reyes stared at the horizon, where lightning flickered wordlessly over the distant hills. Then somewhere inside that signal, Devereaux's still talking. And the children are still answering. He reached into his pocket and drew out the metal tag stamped with the number 12. It pulsed faintly, catching the glow from the dashboard. The hum began again. Low, patient, the same rhythm as always. Outside, the mirage of the reservoir shimmered across the desert like a ghost of water, reflecting nothing but their own faces staring back. The desert highway stretched ahead, silver under a bruised sky. Reyes drove with one hand on the wheel, the other gripping the metal tag. It pulsed against his palm like a second heartbeat. Clara watched the horizon where a storm flickered in silent bursts, each flash painting the world in negative. For the first hour, neither spoke. The radio hissed with intermittent static. No stations, only the occasional whisper that might have been wind. Finally, Clara broke the silence. If the lake's signal can travel through the air, what stops it from moving through anything with water in it? Reyes didn't answer immediately. His throat felt dry, his skin cold despite the heat outside. "Then there's nowhere it can't go," he said. "Every rainstorm, every pipe, every human body, it's all current." "Transmission," she murmured. "That's what he built." They passed a sign half buried in sand. Waterline Research Complex, closed site. The letters were faded, the logo just visible beneath rust, the eye within the wave. Clara turned to him. He had another facility. Reyes slowed the car. The sign pointed toward a dirt track vanishing into the desert. Let's see what he left behind. The road ended at a chain-link fence choked with tumbleweed. Beyond it, half submerged in dust, stood the skeleton of a concrete building. Windows blown out, roof collapsed in places. A cracked water tower loomed behind it, the words "property of TSBRI" still legible. Inside, the air was stale, tasting of rust and dust. Their flashlights cut through the gloom, catching on desiccated lab benches and scattered notebooks. On the far wall, someone had painted a phrase in dripping blue letters: "The water listens." Clara whispered, "Same handwriting as the file note in the hospital archives." Reyes nodded. Devereaux marked every place he touched. They moved deeper through the corridors. In one room, a row of tanks stood shattered and dry, their inner surfaces filmed with a crystalline residue. At the center lay a single intact cylinder filled with cloudy liquid. Something floated within it. Small, circular, mechanical. Reyes leaned closer. A transmitter. Wires ran from the cylinder into a console covered in dust. When Clara brushed a switch, faint power lights flickered on. A low tone filled the room. Steady, rhythmic. "It's broadcasting," she said. "But to where?" He bent over the readout screen. The frequency read 46.00 megahertz. 46B, he muttered. Of course. They recorded the coordinates and disconnected the transmitter's power supply. The tone died, leaving a vacuum of silence that felt physical. Then, the monitors lit up one by one, powered by something unseen. Text scrolled across every screen simultaneously. "Connection lost. Searching for new host." The lights overhead began to strobe. A faint hum rose from the floor, vibrating through the soles of their boots. Reyes grabbed Clara's arm. "Move!" They ran as the building came alive around them, old speakers crackling, pipes groaning as though water rushed through them for the first time in years. Outside, the ground trembled. A plume of dust erupted near the tower, and a geyser of water shot skyward before collapsing into steam. Reyes and Clara threw themselves behind the car, watching as the remaining structure shuddered, collapsed inward, and then settled. The noise stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Clara's voice was barely audible. "He built transmitters into every facility. Maybe into us." Reyes turned the metal tag over in his palm. It was cold again. "Then he's moving through the network." Looking for a signal strong enough to carry him, they drove until nightfall, stopping near a service station that hadn't seen business in years. The neon sign flickered erratically, buzzing in the still air. Reyes stood outside, staring at the stars. so clear they looked like holes punched through the sky. Every constellation reflected faintly in the puddles along the asphalt. Clara joined him with 2 bottles of water. We can't keep running. If he's transmitting through any water source, he'll find us wherever we stop. He unscrewed the bottle, then hesitated. The surface of the water inside shimmered faintly, not from light, but from vibration. A whisper brushed his ear, so soft it could have been memory. Listen. He dropped the bottle. It shattered, the water spreading across the ground and disappearing into the dust. We find the main node, he said hoarsely. The first signal. We shut it down. Clara met his eyes. Back where it started. He nodded. Glass Lake. They reached the outskirts of Harlow County just before dawn. The sky was violet, the air thick with the smell of pine and impending rain. From the hilltop, they could see the lake below, perfectly still, reflecting the first light like a sheet of metal. No tents, no investigators. The feds were gone. Too quiet, Clara said. Reyes gripped the steering wheel. They sealed it. Or something sealed itself. He parked at the same turnout where his investigation had begun weeks ago. The shoreline was untouched, the water clear. But the moment he stepped out, the tag in his pocket vibrated again. Clara pulled hers from her jacket. It glowed faintly, pulsing with the rhythm of the lake's gentle waves. Transmission complete, she whispered. Reyes looked toward the center of the lake, where a ripple spread outward in concentric rings. He's calling us back. The air above Glass Lake was perfectly still, as if the world had paused to listen. Reyes stood at the edge of the dock where it had all begun. The water was clearer than he had ever seen it. No silt, no ripples, only a smooth mirror that returned every detail of the sky. It looked less like a surface than a doorway turned sideways. Clara unpacked the sonar array and set it on the planks. The screen flickered once, then filled with interference. It's jamming itself, she said. No reflection, no depth reading, just noise. The noise wasn't random. Beneath the static pulsed a rhythm, 12 notes, slow and deliberate, the same pattern that haunted their sleep. Reyes knelt, touched the water. Cold lanced up his arm. For an instant, he saw his own face ripple and shift into another. Devereaux's calm smile, eyes hidden behind mirrored lenses. He pulled his hand back, gasping. It's ready, he said. Whatever he started, it's waiting for completion. Clara set her jaw. Then we end it. They carried the portable generator to the dock's edge. The plan was crude but clear. Overload the active frequency. Short every signal the lake still carried. Reyes connected the cables, fingers numb from cold. When he flipped the first switch, the generator whined, lights climbing into red. The water reacted immediately, tiny waves spiraling outward in concentric rings. Frequency at 46 megahertz, Clara said over the rising hum. He'll hear us. Reyes stared at the center of the lake. Good. He threw the final breaker. The surface exploded into motion. A column of water rose, glowing from within. Blue, white, then deep violet. Within it shapes twisted, forming and dissolving. Faces, hands, a tangle of limbs caught in current. The sound that followed was not thunder, but 1,000 overlapping voices, each speaking fragments of the same plea. Listen. Remember, let us go. Clara shielded her ears. It's the children. He's using them to stabilize himself. Reyes forced himself toward the generator. Then we cut him off. He grabbed the main line and yanked. Sparks erupted, searing through the cables. The column shuddered, its light flickering like a heartbeat losing rhythm. From within the glow, a darker shape emerged, a man's silhouette walking upward through the water as though climbing stairs. Sunglasses caught the light. The face behind them was calm, almost gentle. You came back, Devereaux said. His voice was everywhere, the air, the water, the inside of Reyes's skull. "I needed a conduit." "You opened the channel," Reyes shouted over the roar. "You murdered them." "I preserved them. Memory is survival. You can't silence what was built to listen." The column began to collapse, spilling sheets of luminous water across the dock. Each drop hissed where it landed, eating through wood like acid. Clara fought to steady the generator's control board. "Power's spiking. We can overload it if we push past safety." "Do it!" She twisted the dial. The whine turned into a scream of metal. The lake flashed white. Reyes felt himself lifted, thrown backward into the freezing shallows. When the light faded, silence returned, dense, total. Smoke curled from the ruined generator. The dock was half submerged, edges smoldering. Clara crawled beside him, coughing. The lake had gone black again. No glow, no movement. The reflection showed only their two faces, pale and trembling. "Did it work?" she whispered. Reyes listened. For the first time in weeks, there was no hum beneath the wind. "I think we broke the loop." They stayed until sunrise. The sky blushed pink, and fog drifted across the surface like breath finally released. No sirens, no voices, only the creak of settling wood. Clara wrapped her coat tighter. "What now?" Reyes stared at the calm water. "We make sure it stays buried. Every file, every transmitter. We burn it all." She nodded, then hesitated. "And the children." He looked down. In the reflection, their faces rippled once more, not as ghosts, but as simple distortions of light. "They're quiet," he said softly. "That's all we can give them." They turned toward the road, the dawn wind lifting mist behind them. Neither saw the tiny concentric circles forming again at the center of the lake, widening slowly until they reached the shore, gentle, patient, like breathing. That night, miles away in an Austin hotel, Reyes showered until the water ran cold. When he stepped out, the bathroom mirror was fogged. He wiped it with his palm and froze. Across the glass, written in the steam, were 4 words: "The water remembers you." He stared until the letters began to drip, running together into meaningless streaks. Outside, thunder murmured distantly, as if the lake itself had drawn a new breath. The rain returned to Austin 3 days later. It came quietly at first, soft drizzles sliding down the hotel window pane where Reyes sat awake in the dark. He hadn't slept since the lake. Every time his eyes closed, the water inside his mind began to move again. Slow, deliberate, and aware. Across the room, Clara dozed on the couch with the TV still flickering. The local news murmured faintly about electrical disturbances across Harlow County, about lightning storms forming without warning over abandoned terrain. None of the reporters mentioned the lake. That was buried already. Orders from above. Reyes reached for his phone and scrolled through the case file one more time. Case 46. B. The Glass Lake Disappearances. Each victim's name stared back at him in thin gray letters. Ages 6 to 15, missing between 1974 and 1984. Every one of them vanished near water. Their photographs looked like echoes from the same dream. The hum began again, soft, almost imperceptible. Not from the room, but from within him. He pressed his palms to his ears. It didn't help. "Detective." The voice was faint, layered, genderless. He looked toward the bathroom. The shower curtain shifted slightly, though no air stirred. He stood, every muscle coiled, and reached for his gun on the table. The hum deepened. Behind him, the TV flickered from newsfeed to static. Clara woke instantly. "What is it?" "Something's here." They watched as water began to drip from the ceiling vent. One drop, then another. Each hit the carpet with a heavy, resonant tone, as if the sound itself were amplified. The drips began to form a pattern. 12 beats. The same rhythm from the transmitter. Clara whispered, "He's not gone." The lights dimmed. Across the wall, the reflection of the television static rippled like water. Words formed within it for only a second. "Remember the resonance." Then everything went dark. When power returned, the carpet was dry. The message was gone. Clara exhaled slowly, heart still hammering. He's broadcasting again. Through rain, Reyes holstered his weapon and looked out at the storm. Then he's not confined to the lake anymore. He's using the weather system. The realization landed cold. If Devereaux's signal could travel through atmospheric moisture, every storm was a carrier. The whole state could be a transmitter now. They checked out of the hotel within the hour. Reyes loaded the trunk with the remaining case files, notebooks, and drives, then tossed the burnt metal tag inside. Clara climbed in beside him, soaked from the downpour. "Where?" she asked. "Back to headquarters," he said. "We need to trace the original transmission point before it spread." The drive through the storm was claustrophobic. Rain hit the windshield like static, obscuring the world beyond the wipers. Clara pulled her jacket tighter, watching water streak across the glass. "It feels like he's listening through it," she said. Reyes didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead, where faint blue flashes lit the clouds. He couldn't shake the sense that the lightning had rhythm, that the storm itself was speaking. They reached the Austin field office after midnight. The power was out there too, but the backup generator still hummed weakly. Inside, their desks looked untouched, though a thin layer of moisture slicked every surface. The file cabinet smelled of rain. Clara booted her laptop using the emergency line. If the resonance spread through the storm network, the weather satellites might have picked up anomalies, frequencies that don't belong. Reyes began flipping through old reports. Devereaux recorded in multiple bands. Look for anything pulsing around 46 megahertz minutes past. Then Clara's screen blinked. "Got something." She turned the laptop toward him. A map filled the display. Texas covered in swirling storm cells, most faint gray, one pulsing in bright white. The signal originated east of Harlow County, then branched outward like veins. Every thunderstorm formed along those lines. Reyes leaned closer. "That's not natural convection, it's controlled." She zoomed in. Here, at the center, a small circular clearing surrounded by forest, miles from any town. The coordinates matched an old facility listed in the Devereaux archives. "Waterline Substation B," Reyes read aloud. He built a secondary core. The hum returned, stronger this time, vibrating through the floor in their chests. Papers lifted slightly from the desk, drawn upward by invisible current. The office lights flickered. Clara clutched the table. "He knows we found it." Reyes grabbed his coat. "Then we move now, before he closes it." The rain thickened as they left Austin. The highway stretched ahead, empty except for their headlights carving a tunnel through the dark. Clara watched the lightning crawl across the sky like veins of white fire. "What if he's not trying to kill us?" she said quietly. "What if he's trying to finish something?" Reyes kept his eyes on the road. "You mean, use us?" She nodded. "He said we were conduits. Maybe he can't complete transmission without a receiver strong enough to contain it." He thought of the metal tag, the way it pulsed against his skin, of the children's voices in the water. "Then we end the line." No more receivers. The GPS led them off the main highway onto a dirt road that wound through pine forest. Lightning flashed intermittently through the trees, illuminating rusted power poles and the broken remains of fences. The hum intensified, now audible without instruments, a low vibration in the air like the start of an earthquake. At last, they reached a clearing. The forest fell away to reveal a massive concrete dome half-collapsed under its own weight. Rain poured down its cracked surface, streaming into vents that glowed faintly from within. "This is it," Clara said. "Waterline B." Inside, the air was heavy with humidity and electricity. Pools of rainwater covered the floor, each reflecting the single flickering light at the dome's center. Machinery lined the walls, rusted consoles, open panels revealing coils and tubing. At the far end stood a cylindrical chamber filled with water. Something drifted inside it, a small figure suspended in the liquid, unmoving. Reyes approached slowly, every instinct screaming to stop. The glass was fogged from within. When he wiped it clean, he saw a child's face staring back at him, eyes closed, serene. Clara covered her mouth. "It's one of the missing kids." He touched the glass. The eyes opened, not with recognition, but with light. Blue, steady, cold. The hum rose to a roar. The dome shuddered. All around them, the rain outside pounded harder, syncing perfectly with the pulse of that child's stare. Clara whispered, "He built them into the system." Reyes stepped back, the horror of it settling like ice. He turned them into transmitters. The chamber lights shifted to deep crimson. A voice filled the dome, distorted but unmistakable. "You can't destroy what became the weather." The floor vibrated violently. Water burst from the vents, flooding the room. Clara screamed over the noise, "We need to shut it off!" Reyes looked at the control console. Dozens of dials, switches, each corroded. He didn't know which one still worked, but he knew what had to happen. He pulled his gun and aimed at the glass chamber. Clara caught his arm. "Reyes, he's a child. He's a conduit." His voice was raw. "And so am I." He fired. The bullet cracked the glass, then another. Water surged outward, slamming both of them into the wall. The hum crescendoed into a piercing scream. Through the torrent, the child's light faded, flickered, then vanished. The dome went silent. Only the rain outside continued to fall, soft and steady, washing the blood from Reyes's knuckles as he lowered the gun. For a long time, there was only the sound of water dripping through the cracked dome. Reyes lay on the wet floor, chest heaving, his right ear ringing from the gunfire and the concussion of the collapsing glass. The smell of ozone and iron clung to the air. Clara was slumped against the wall, soaked and trembling, her hands pressed over her mouth. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, distant. It stopped. Reyes forced himself upright. The red lights had gone dark. The chamber that had held the child was shattered. Its contents spilled into the pooling water that now covered the floor. The glow that had burned behind those eyes was gone, and with it, the vibration that had haunted the building. He stared at the ruined machinery. "It stopped here," he said quietly, "but not out there." Outside, thunder still rolled across the forested hills, soft but endless, like a giant breathing in its sleep. They waded toward the exit. Rain poured in through cracks in the dome, carrying with it scraps of paper that floated past their boots. Reyes caught one. The ink had bled almost completely away, but he could make out 2 words. "Listen always." He let it drift from his fingers, watching it dissolve into the water. The drive back was slow. Fallen branches littered the road, and fog clung low to the trees. Clara stared out the window, her reflection pale against the glass. "That boy," she said finally. "He wasn't dead before we broke the glass." "He looked right at you," Reyes gripped the wheel tighter. "I know. Do you think he saw us as saviors?" He shook his head. "Transmitters don't believe in salvation." They drove the rest of the way in silence. The storm followed them like a living thing, never too far behind, flashing occasionally through the rear-view mirror. When they reached the outskirts of Austin, dawn was beginning to lift. The city looked almost peaceful under a silver sky. But when Reyes turned on the radio, static filled the car speakers. Beneath it, faint but distinct, came the same 12-beat rhythm. Clara turned to him, eyes wide. "Reyes." He shut the radio off before she could finish. "He's bleeding through the airwaves now." "It's everywhere, so we failed." He didn't answer. The wipers swept back and forth across the windshield, spreading rain that looked almost luminous. He couldn't shake the thought that each drop was a receiver, tuned to the same impossible frequency. At headquarters, the storm had knocked out half the grid. Only the emergency lights burned dimly along the corridors. The building was empty except for a single night clerk asleep at his post. Reyes and Clara stepped inside the evidence room. The air smelled of mildew and damp paper. He opened the metal drawer that held the remains of the Glass Lake files and stared at the rows of neatly labeled envelopes. Each tag bore a name, a photograph, a date. He had memorized them all. Clara reached for the nearest folder. "We can still hand this over to Washington," she said. "Let them study what's left." "Maybe." Reyes slammed the drawer shut. "No." She blinked. "What do you mean, no? This doesn't get archived. It gets erased." He pulled the lighter from his coat pocket, the same one he'd used in the field for years. The metal clicked open, flaring pale in the gloom. Clara stepped back, eyes wide. "Reyes, these are evidence." "Evidence of what?" he snapped. "Of a man who turned weather into a graveyard? Of children turned into transmitters? This file doesn't end. It replicates. Every name in here is a seed for him to grow through again." She hesitated, then whispered, "And what if burning them only feeds it?" Reyes stared at the small flame. "Then at least it feeds on ashes." He dropped the lighter into the drawer. Fire leapt upward, licking the edges of the folders, consuming them one by one. Within minutes, the names were gone, replaced by curling black fragments and smoke. They watched until the sprinklers came on, spraying cold water that hissed over the embers. The hiss became a whisper, a voice threading through the mist. "Remember me." The sprinklers stopped. Silence again. They left the building before anyone arrived. Outside, the clouds were breaking apart. Shafts of morning light pierced through, striking the wet pavement. Steam rose from every surface. Clara turned her face to the sun, as if testing whether the world was real again. Reyes lit a cigarette with his backup lighter and exhaled slowly. "You think it's over?" She didn't answer. Her gaze followed a gutter where rainwater still trickled, winding between leaves and debris before disappearing into a drain. The faintest hum rose from it, soft, rhythmic, steady. Clara looked at him. "It never ends, does it?" Reyes dropped the cigarette into the stream. It hissed once and vanished. "No," he said. "It just changes frequency." They walked toward the car, neither looking back as the sound of running water followed them down the street like an unfinished thought. That night, Reyes dreamed of the lake again. But this time, it wasn't a nightmare. The water was calm, moonlit, the air still. Beneath the surface, he could see hundreds of faces watching him, not in torment, but in quiet waiting. The hum was there too, soft as breathing. He waded in until it reached his chest. The cold was almost comforting. The reflections merged with his own face, rippling outward until they were indistinguishable. "Listen," a voice whispered. Not Devereaux's this time, but many voices, overlapping. "You freed us." He opened his mouth to reply, but the water filled his throat, silencing him. The hum became one long, pure note that vibrated through his bones, and then nothing. He woke before dawn, heart steady, room silent. The air smelled faintly of rain. When he turned on the bedside lamp, he saw a single drop of water on the nightstand. It quivered once, perfectly spherical, before evaporating in the light. Reyes exhaled, long and slow. For the first time, he didn't hear the hum. Outside, the storm clouds were gone, but far to the north, beyond the horizon, a low rumble of thunder suggested the signal was still moving, searching for a new receiver. The silence didn't last. By midweek, a faint vibration began again, so soft that at first Reyes mistook it for tinnitus. Then he realized it came from the building itself. The walls of the old bureau annex trembled slightly, as if wind pressed from inside rather than out. He stood in the records hall where dust lay thick as snow on the shelves. The government had shuttered this wing years ago, after a flood compromised its foundations. But tonight, fluorescent lights buzzed to life down the corridor, one by one, with no power line feeding them. Clara had joined him, her hair tied back, flashlight beams slicing through the gloom. "You sure this is where we'll find it?" Reyes nodded. "This is where Devereaux started before Glass Lake. He worked for the Weather Systems Division. Experimental communications. The files should be down here." She brushed dust from a rusted cabinet label. Archive. Department 7. Atmospheric Interfaces. The drawers were swollen from moisture but opened with a groan. Inside, thousands of pages, brittle with age. Reyes took a stack to a nearby desk and began leafing through them, scanning old diagrams, wave patterns, resonance chambers, sketches of what looked like human silhouettes connected by cables. Clara lifted one of the folders. "These are dated 1958. That's 20 years before Glass Lake." Reyes frowned. He wasn't the first. The vibration intensified. Papers rustled though no air moved. The ceiling light flickered. Then Clara found it. File 46A. She laid it open between them. The first page was a memo. Project Glass. Primary objective: to test acoustic reflection and harmonic memory retention in human neural patterns via aqueous medium. Beneath it was a black and white photograph of children standing beside a pool. Dozens of them in hospital gowns, each staring blankly ahead. The caption read, "Site, Port Aransas Medical Research Annex, 1959. Clara's hand trembled. "Dear God." Reyes stared at the photograph until his vision blurred. The disappearances didn't start in the 70s. They were just the ones anyone noticed. They heard the first voice soon after midnight. It came from the far end of the corridor, faint as an echo in a cave. "Detective." Reyes froze. The sound was not quite human, more like a recording replayed through damaged tape. Clara swung her flashlight down the hall. Nothing, only shelves, dust, and an open door at the end. "It's the resonance," she whispered. "This place is still carrying it." They approached the door cautiously. Beyond it lay a stairwell leading down to a lower level Reyes hadn't seen on the blueprints. Moisture dripped from the ceiling. The smell of old water filled the air. At the bottom was a small laboratory. Rusted metal tables, broken monitors, a cracked observation window overlooking a dark chamber. Reyes brushed grime from the control panel and squinted at the labels. "Submersive memory tank, prototype." Behind the glass, something moved. He turned on his flashlight and froze. Inside the murky tank, a human shape floated. Adult, not child. Its features obscured by layers of sediment. Tubes trailed from its mouth and chest, leading into the walls. Its hand rested against the glass as if waiting for them. Clara stepped back. "Reyes." He moved closer, pressing his palm to the glass opposite the figures. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the tank flickered with light, a faint pulse traveling through the water like heartbeat. The figure's head tilted upward. One eye opened, gleaming faintly blue. Reyes stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The voice came again, clearer this time, through the intercom speaker on the control board. "Memory. Preserved. Transmission. Incomplete." Clara grabbed the console, flipping switches in desperation. "Who are you?" Static, then, "Dr. Avery Devereaux. You've reached the archive." The sound of water dripping echoed behind his words, as though he were standing waist-deep somewhere far below them. Reyes leaned in. "Devereaux's dead. A reflection does not die, detective. It waits for recognition. The tank's light intensified until the water glowed white. The figure's face became visible now. A man in his late 50s, features eroded by time but unmistakably him. Devereaux smiled, small and patient. "You silenced the lake," he said. "You did well. But that was only the receiver. This is the source." The vibration through the floor grew until the entire laboratory quivered. Dust fell from the ceiling like ash. Clara shouted over the noise, "He's waking it up!" Reyes drew his pistol. "How do we shut it down?" Devereaux's expression softened. "You can't. You are it." The glass cracked. A thin line of light split the tank from top to bottom. Steam hissed from the vents. Reyes fired, but the bullet ricocheted harmlessly off the reinforced wall. The crack widened, and a burst of luminous water poured out, flooding across the floor toward them. They ran. The stairwell filled fast. Water chased their boots, alive with light. As they climbed, voices rose from below, children again, their cries woven into a single harmony that vibrated through the concrete. "Keep moving," Reyes shouted. They burst into the main hall. The lights above shattered, one after another, as the resonance swept through the building. Every puddle mirrored a face. The photographs on the desk fluttered as if caught in a breeze from beneath the earth. Clara looked back once. "He's turning the whole archive into a transmitter. Then we bury it," Reyes said. They reached the maintenance exit and sprinted out into the rain. The ground outside rumbled. Through the open doorway they saw the lower floor collapse inward, the dome beneath swallowing itself. A surge of steam erupted, then fell silent. When the tremor stopped, only the rain remained. The building stood intact, but lifeless. The hum was gone. Clara leaned against the wall, soaked, gasping. "Did we stop it?" Reyes looked at the cracks running up the side of the structure. From one of them, water seeped steadily, glowing faintly blue. He shook his head. "No, we just found where it sleeps." They drove away without speaking, the city lights dim in the distance. Behind them, the annex sat quiet in the dark. Until, hours later, one basement light flickered back on, casting long, rippling reflections across the water pooling on the floor. And far above, the rain began to fall in perfect 12-beat rhythm. By dawn, the storm had dwindled to a fine mist. The road stretched ahead like a ribbon of tarnished glass. Reyes hadn't spoken for an hour. Clara drove in silence, glancing occasionally at his reflection in the window. He looked pale, hollow, a man carrying the weight of something he no longer believed could be put down. Finally, she said, "If he built that prototype in the 50s, someone funded it. Someone signed the papers, authorized the testing." Reyes nodded slowly. "And those signatures were blacked out." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the soggy folder she'd managed to save from the archive before the flood swallowed the rest. Between the warped pages was a single memo, water-stained but legible. Directive 46, National Weather Service Collaboration. Data relay approved for Project Glass continuation. Oversight transferred to Department of Defense Acoustic Intelligence. Clara's voice was barely audible. "Acoustic intelligence!" Reyes's mouth went dry. They weaponized it. He took the memo from her hands. At the bottom, beneath the typed signatures, was a single line scrawled in pen. Erivos. He stared at the name until the paper trembled in his grasp. That's what he called himself when he consulted for the Bureau. Not Devereaux, Erivos, the Greek word for darkness. Clara looked at him. "You think he was using a pseudonym even then?" "He wasn't hiding from them," Reyes said quietly. "He was hiding for them." They stopped at a roadside diner for coffee. The place was nearly empty, only a jukebox humming softly in the corner. Outside, fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. Clara spread the memo across the table, flattening it with her palms. "We could go public," she said. "Hand it to journalists, whistleblowers, anyone. Let the truth out before they bury it again." Reyes stirred his coffee, eyes fixed on the dark swirl inside the cup. "And when they call it conspiracy, when the evidence evaporates, literally, you saw what happens to anyone who listens too long?" Clara leaned forward. "Then what? We walk away. Pretend none of it's still transmitting." He met her gaze. "No. We make sure no one can ever listen again." Her jaw tightened. "How?" He tapped the folder. "That acoustic array the government built in the 50s. They called it the Deep Archive. A backup receiver buried under the desert. Every experiment was mirrored there. If we destroy it, we cut the line." Clara nodded slowly. "Then that's where we go." They reached West Texas by nightfall. The land was flat, endless, dotted with oil pumps that moved like mechanical birds bowing to invisible gods. The coordinates from the memo led them down a dirt track to a chain of low hills. At their base, half hidden beneath sand, a steel door stood sealed with a faded government insignia. Reyes brushed the dust away. "Department of Defense Facility 46, Atmospheric Research." Clara pried open the rusted keypad with her knife, crossing wires until a spark jumped. The door shuddered, then hissed open, exhaling air that smelled of salt and static. They descended a narrow stairwell lit by emergency bulbs that still burned with faint blue light. At the bottom stretched a tunnel lined with thick glass panels. Behind each panel, water flowed, endless, contained, glowing faintly from within. Clara whispered, "He built a river underground." Reyes ran a hand along the glass. "A network. Memory stored as liquid signal." At the tunnel's end stood a chamber filled with consoles still humming quietly. In the center, a vast pool of perfectly still water. On its surface floated dozens of metallic discs, transmitters, each engraved with the symbol of the eye within the wave. Reyes crouched beside the nearest console. He mirrored every experiment here. Glass Lake, the hospital, the substation, each one recorded. Clara knelt beside him, studying the readouts. It's not just memory. It's collective. Every reflection feeding into one system, he found the power control. "We drain it." She hesitated. "You sure that's safe?" He gave a humorless smile. Safety stopped existing in 1959. He pulled the master lever. The hum faltered, then dropped an octave into a low drone. The discs began to spin slowly, light dimming on each one. For a moment, he thought it was working, until the pool brightened again, stronger than before. The screens on the consoles came alive. Lines of text scrolled upward faster than they could read. The same word repeated, "Receiver found, receiver found, receiver found." The water vibrated, sending ripples across the room. From the center of the pool, a shape began to form, a column of liquid rising, twisting. Within it, the faint outline of a face. Not Devereaux's this time, Clara's. She stumbled backward. "Reyes!" The reflection opened its eyes. Blue light spilled out, bathing the chamber in cold fire. Reyes reached for the power switch, but the lever slammed back into place on its own. The system roared to life. Data streamed across the monitors. Heart rate, neural activity, sound frequency, all matching Clara's readings on the portable monitor still clipped to her belt. "It's using you," Reyes shouted. "You're the conduit now." She staggered, pressing both hands to her temples. "I can hear them." "Let us be remembered," the voices said through her mouth, layered, childlike, endless. Reyes grabbed her shoulders. "Clara, fight it." For a moment, her eyes flickered between blue and their natural green. "I can stop it," she gasped. "But you have to shut it off from your end." He turned toward the generator, hands slick with sweat. "Tell me how." "Override the frequency. Set it to silence." He hesitated. Silence has no frequency. Her lips curved into a faint, strange smile. Exactly. He ripped the emergency panel open, sparks showering down. Wires hissed as he crossed circuits, the air thick with ozone. The light from the pool pulsed faster, the resonance building to a deafening pitch. He could feel it in his bones, shaking him apart. Finally, he twisted the dial until the frequency meter hit 0. The hum broke, replaced by a sudden void so deep it seemed to swallow all sound. The pool froze mid-motion, the reflection shattered into 1,000 ripples, and then stillness. Clara collapsed. Reyes caught her before she hit the floor. Her pulse fluttered weakly, then steadied. The blue light in her eyes faded. The consoles went dark one by one. Only the soft echo of dripping water remained. He whispered, "It's done." But as he lifted her, he noticed something new on the central monitor. A single line of text blinking slowly. Archive copied. Transmission continues. Reyes stared at it for a long moment. Then he pulled the power cable free. The light died. He carried Clara up the stairwell and out into the night. Rain had begun to fall again, but it was clean this time. Clear, scentless, ordinary. For the first time in weeks, the hum was gone. Hours later, in an operations center hundreds of miles away, a technician monitored a bank of weather screens. One radar feed glitched, briefly displaying an old project header, glass. Acoustic memory initiative. Then the file renamed itself, "The Echo Continues." The technician frowned, typed a command to close it. The screen went black. But in its reflection, faint against the glass, a face smiled back, calm, patient, and listening. The rain had finally ended. For the first time in months, the clouds broke open over Texas, revealing a clean, pale sky. It looked almost too still, as though the weather itself were holding its breath. Reyes sat on the tailgate of the bureau truck, watching Clara sleep inside the cab. She hadn't spoken much since the deep archive. Her vitals were steady now, her pulse normal, but sometimes her eyes flickered faintly blue when she dreamed. He told himself it was only the reflection of dawn. He pulled the last cigarette from the pack and lit it. Smoke curled upward in the cool air, vanishing into the brightness above. Around him, the desert was silent except for the low crackle of cooling metal. The wind had died entirely. Not a bird, not a sound. Silence so pure it made his ears ring. He thought about the line on the monitor before he killed the power. Archive copied. Transmission continues. It looped in his mind like a radio signal with no station left to receive it. He exhaled slowly. "If you're still out there," he muttered, "you'll have to do better than silence." When Clara woke, they drove east. Neither spoke for the first 100 miles. The road shimmered with heat, the horizon wavering. At a rest stop outside San Angelo, she finally broke the quiet. "I saw them again," she said softly. Reyes glanced at her. "In your dream?" She nodded. They weren't afraid anymore. They were. Waiting. For what? "I don't know." She turned her face toward the window. "Maybe to see if we kept our promise." He didn't ask which promise. He already knew. By the time they reached Austin, the city had returned to its old rhythm. Traffic, sunlight on glass buildings, the smell of wet asphalt. The ordinary noise of life felt almost foreign now. Reyes parked outside bureau headquarters and shut off the engine. "Officially," he said, "we'll file this as a containment success. Subsonic interference. Equipment anomaly. The usual." Clara smiled faintly. "And unofficially?" He looked at her. "We stopped listening." She nodded once. "That might be harder than you think." They walked through the bureau lobby, past rows of employees who had no idea how close the world had come to being rewritten in sound. No one noticed the faint shimmer on the floor where wet footprints appeared briefly behind them. and then faded, as if the building itself were exhaling relief. That evening, Reyes returned to his apartment. It was still as he had left it. Papers stacked on the counter, dishes in the sink, blinds half drawn. But the air felt lighter now, as though some pressure had finally lifted. He poured a glass of water and stared at it for a long moment. The surface remained perfectly still. He drank it all, waiting for the familiar vibration in his chest. Nothing, only quiet. He went to the window. The sunset had painted the skyline in gold and violet. Somewhere far off, thunder rumbled. Not menacing, not rhythmic, just thunder. Normal. He smiled for the first time in months. The next morning he woke before dawn. The silence in the room was so complete, it startled him. No hum of refrigerator, no traffic below. He stepped to the window. The city was still dark, the streets empty. A layer of fog rolled between the buildings, thick and slow. He thought he saw movement within it. Figures walking, faint outlines dissolving as the light grew. He pressed his hand to the glass, breath fogging the pain. Whispers drifted faintly through the silence. Not words this time, just a low chorus, almost peaceful. He whispered back, "You're free now." The fog thinned. The city woke. Cars began to move, lights flickered on, sound returned in a rush. The whispering stopped. At Bureau HQ, he found Clara already in the records room. She had a stack of printouts spread across the table, satellite readings, weather logs, radar data. "You need to see this," she said. Reyes leaned over the pages. "What am I looking at?" She pointed to a set of figures along the Gulf Coast. Low-frequency interference, same signature as the Glass Lake resonance. "It's weak, but it's there." He frowned. "You're saying it survived?" "No," she said. It moved. The data showed faint pulses stretching southward, disappearing beneath the Gulf waters. A steady, 12-beat rhythm barely distinguishable from the ocean's own current. Reyes rubbed his temples. How far can it travel through salt water? Clara met his eyes. How far does the tide go? They drove to the coast that night. The sea smelled clean, sharp, alive. The wind whipped around them, scattering sand across their boots. Reyes stood at the water's edge, waves curling over his shoes, the surf cool against his ankles. He closed his eyes and listened. Nothing at first. Then, buried deep beneath the natural rhythm of the waves, a faint vibration, soft, almost like breath. He opened his eyes to the horizon. A single flash of lightning illuminated the clouds far out at sea, then faded. Clara stood beside him. "It's still talking." Reyes nodded. "Then we'll listen just long enough to know where it's going." And then, he looked at her, the wind tugging at his coat. "Then we let silence have the last word." The docks at Port Aransas were nearly deserted by the time Reyes and Clara arrived. A single fishing trawler idled near the end of the pier, its deck lights painting the waves in pale gold. The captain, an old man named Holt, leaned against the railing smoking a pipe. "You two the researchers?" he rasped. "Said you wanted a ride out past the rigs?" Reyes nodded. "As far as your instruments can still read depth." Holt squinted at them through the smoke. "You're chasing that Navy ghost again, aren't you?" "Same coordinates that fried my sonar last year." Reyes didn't bother denying it. "We'll pay double." The man shrugged. "Your funeral." They left shore just before midnight. The moon hung low and heavy, its reflection rippling through the black water. Clara set up the portable receiver on deck, headphones pressed tight against her ears. Every few minutes she adjusted the dial, hunting for that faint hum buried in the static of the sea. By 2 a.m., the coastline was gone. Only endless dark water and the slow churn of the boat's engine remained. Holt muttered about currents and ghosts, but Reyes barely heard him. The wind tasted of salt and electricity, the same flavor of the storm at Glass Lake. Clara straightened suddenly. "I've got it!" Reyes joined her. On the monitor, a thin line of frequency pulsed steadily at 46 megahertz. The same signature, the same rhythm. "It's coming from below," she whispered. "Deep, 200 meters at least." The deck beneath them vibrated faintly. Holt cursed under his breath. "What the hell are you pulling up?" "Nothing," Reyes said. "We're just listening." The vibration grew stronger, humming through the hull. Water around the boat began to glow faintly blue. Clara's monitor flickered. Words appeared across the screen. Echo Network Online. Primary node. Atlantic Array. Transmission. Global. Her breath hitched. He did it. He linked the oceans. Reyes stared at the glowing water, speechless. Devereaux hadn't just built a machine. He'd taught the entire planet to remember. The hum climbed in pitch until it seemed to come from inside their own skulls. Holt shouted something about shutting down the engine, but the sound drowned him out. The sea itself was speaking. "Memory is water. Water is everywhere. We are awake." Clara ripped the headphones off, clutching her head. It's inside the signal now, it's thinking. Reyes grabbed the emergency beacon from the cabin. "If it's a network, we can overload it, like before." "How?" He tossed the beacon into the glowing waves. Feedback. The ocean responded instantly. The light flared, blinding white, the sound collapsing into a single, piercing note that swallowed every other noise. The boat rocked violently. Waves surged high, then fell flat. The glow vanished. The sea returned to black. Silence. The receiver's screen was dark. The signal gone. Dawn crept over the horizon, a thin line of gold. The ocean was calm again, glassy and endless. Reyes sat on the deck, soaked and trembling. Holt muttered a prayer to no one in particular. Clara crouched beside the receiver, adjusting dials that gave no response. "Did we kill it?" she asked quietly. Reyes looked out at the water. "You can't kill what's become an element, but maybe we taught it to sleep again." They turned back toward shore. As the coastline appeared through the mist, the air felt strangely new, lighter, freer, as if the world had exhaled. Weeks passed. Reports of strange storms dwindled. The hum that once haunted every frequency faded completely. Reyes returned to quiet duty in Austin, mostly administrative work, the kind that didn't involve ghosts of science. One evening, as he closed his case files, he noticed a small puddle forming beneath the water cooler in the corner of the office. The janitor must have overfilled it. He bent to wipe it up and paused. The surface of the water quivered, perfectly rhythmic. 12 beats. He watched it for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Still listening, huh?" The water stilled, as if acknowledging him. Then, slowly, one final ripple spread outward and disappeared. Later, on his way home, he stopped by the lake that bordered the city park. The surface was calm, moonlight broken into silver shards. Clara's voice echoed in his memory. "Maybe they're waiting to see if we kept our promise." He knelt by the water, touched it lightly. It was cold, but peaceful. "You can rest now," he whispered. In the reflection, for the briefest moment, he thought he saw them. The children of Glass Lake, standing together beneath the water's surface, smiling. Then they faded into the dark, and only his own reflection remained. Reyes stood, pocketed his badge, and walked away. Behind him, the water stayed still. For once, there was no echo. It was spring again in Austin. 6 years had passed since the night the ocean lit like glass. Most of the world had moved on, filing the incident under atmospheric anomaly and localized magnetic storm. Only a few lines in the Bureau's hidden archives still carried its true designation. Case 46. B. The Glass Lake Disappearances. Reyes had retired. He'd traded the hum of bureau corridors for the quiet of a small house north of the river, where the trees grew thick and the cicadas sang until dusk. His hair was silver now, his gait slower, but his eyes still carried that restless alertness of men who once stared too long into the abyss. He spent his mornings walking by the reservoir near the edge of the city, the new one, built after the old glass lake had been drained and fenced for environmental rehabilitation. The world had forgotten the name, but he hadn't. Sometimes, when the light hit the water just right, he thought he saw faint ripples that didn't belong to the wind. Not violent anymore, just small circular disturbances, like breathing. He would stand there, hands in pockets, listening. Only wind, only birds, nothing else. Yet the silence was never entirely silent. Not to him. That morning, a letter waited on his porch. No return address. Thick envelope, bureau paper, but older. The watermark still the emblem they'd retired years ago. He slid it open carefully. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. It showed a young woman standing beside a calm lake, wearing a navy blue coat. Her expression was distant, but peaceful. Written on the back, in an unfamiliar hand, were 2 words. She remembers. Reyes sat heavily on the porch step, the world narrowing around him. He knew who the woman was. Lucia Halbrook, older now, but unmistakable. The last missing child of Glass Lake. He turned the photo over again, studying the water behind her. It wasn't any lake he recognized. The reflection of pine trees suggested somewhere far north. Maybe Oregon, maybe Canada. The photo was recent. The color tones were modern. So she had found her own silence. He felt a slow smile creep across his face. The world, it seemed, had decided to give her back to itself. That night, he couldn't sleep. Rain tapped the windows softly, like a gentle code. He sat by his desk, the photograph propped against the lamp. The air smelled faintly of ozone. At midnight, his old phone buzzed. The screen flashed unknown number. Against better judgment, he answered. Static. Then a whisper, so faint he almost thought it was the rain itself. It's quiet now. He swallowed hard. Clara? A pause, then, all of them. They're quiet now, even the sea. The line clicked dead. The phone displayed no signal. He sat there for a long time, listening to the house breathe. At dawn, he drove west, through the thin fog rolling over the hills. He didn't plan where to go. He just followed the road that felt familiar, past towns with shuttered diners and rusting water towers, until he saw the faded sign, Glass Lake. Closed area, the fence was half collapsed now, grass grown through the mesh. The warning signs were sun-bleached to illegibility. He parked, climbed over, and walked down the old access path. Birds scattered ahead of him, startled by the intrusion of memory. When he reached the basin, he stopped. The lake was gone, replaced by a shallow depression filled with reeds and patches of standing water. The air smelled of damp earth and wildflowers. It was beautiful in its ruin, like nature reclaiming a scar. Reyes stood there for a long while, the breeze rustling the grass. Then he noticed something near the center, a shimmer, subtle but distinct, spreading across one of the puddles. He walked closer. The puddle was perfectly round, maybe 4 feet across. Its surface mirrored the sky with uncanny precision. As he knelt, a faint hum reached his ears. 12 beats, slow and distant. He smiled sadly. You never really left, did you? The puddle pulsed once, as though in acknowledgement, then went still. He stayed until the wind died, and the reflection held his face. Older, lined, but peaceful. When he finally turned to leave, he whispered, "Rest easy." Behind him, the puddles shimmered one last time and evaporated under the rising sun. Reyes didn't look back. He didn't need to. He had heard the silence answer. 10 years later, a new name appeared in a scientific journal out of Norway. Dr. Lucia Berit Halbrook, Cognitive Hydrology Division, Bergen Institute. Her paper was short, clinical, and unassuming. Acoustic memory in closed water systems. Most readers skimmed past it, too technical for the general eye. Only one retired detective in Texas recognized the meaning behind the careful language, the subtle heartbeat beneath the mathematics. He received the printed issue by post 3 months after publication. The envelope bore no return address, only a faint watermark shaped like a ripple. Inside, Lucia's article was marked with a single note in blue ink at the margin. The water forgets, but not completely. El Reyes read it twice, then looked up at the quiet morning light pouring through his window. The air outside smelled of rain. He felt no fear this time, only a strange, quiet gratitude. The girl who had once been lost in sound had become the scientist who learned to listen without drowning. He folded the paper, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it beside the photograph on his desk. Both women, Lucia and Clara, had found peace in different corners of the world. The Bureau had long since sealed the file. The world no longer spoke of Case 46B. And yet sometimes, late at night when the storms rolled in from the Gulf, the rain on his roof arranged itself into a rhythm. 12 slow beats. Gentle, steady, reassuring. Not the voice of something trapped or hungry anymore, but something alive. One evening, years later, a young graduate researcher at a weather monitoring station near Reykjavik recorded a strange anomaly. Her instruments caught a repeating subsonic pattern during a deep-sea survey. Low harmonic pulses spaced evenly like a heartbeat. The report she filed described it as biological in nature, likely seismic echo through the mid-Atlantic ridge. The data was archived, unremarked, but in the accompanying audio file, buried deep in the static, a whisper lingered. Memory is water. Water is everywhere. We are awake. She played it once, frowned, and wrote a note in the margin of her logbook. Playback interference resembles human cadence. Then she saved it under a test tag, GL Echo 0001. Outside, the sea shifted in the moonlight. Waves rolled gently toward the black shore, their foam luminous as glass. Thousands of miles away, in Texas, Reyes dreamed of the lake one last time. He stood on the shore at dawn, the surface clear as a mirror. Across the water he saw faint silhouettes, Lucia, Clara, Jim Halbrook, and countless others who had once been lost. They were not calling anymore. They were listening. The reflection trembled slightly, forming words not spoken but understood. Thank you for keeping your promise. Reyes felt the wind rise, carrying the scent of rain. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the lake was gone, replaced by a wide field of wildflowers swaying under a silent sky. No water, no echoes, only peace. He exhaled, smiling. Silence, he whispered, the truest sound of all. The wind carried it away, rippling through the grass like a final wave. If you followed the story this far, remember to subscribe for more cinematic investigations into the forgotten and the strange. Every case leaves an echo. You just have to listen closely enough to hear it.